Please be seated. We're about to start. So, welcome everybody to the Women in Mars Conference. I'm Chris Carberry. I'm Executive Director of Explore Mars. It's kind of an interesting story. About early in May this year, I was in Rebecca Kaiser's office at NASA. We're discussing various topics, and then kind of demographics within the space community came up. And we'd been talking about how many more women there were in the space community now than there were 20 years ago. And it just seemed to both of us there were more women involved in Mars exploration and other areas of the space program. We didn't know if that was true or not, but we thought it would be an interesting topic for our conference. And so here we are as a result of that conversation back in May. So I welcome you all today. I want to give you a few logistical notes first. As you know, with the program today, we're a really strong lineup of speakers. We're going to start off with Katie Coleman this morning. It'll be great. We have, three panels today, as well as a speaker. We have Penny Boston speaking at the end of today. We're to have STEM conversations, policy discussions tomorrow, as well as a great panel concerning how we're going to actually get to Mars. And tomorrow we have policy discussions, as well, as I said, and a great science panel, which I think you'll all be impressed by. And we'll be wrapping up with Rebecca Kaiser giving the final speech tomorrow. Just a note to all of you who ordered lunches, those will be served, I believe, upstairs at lunchtime. Please let us know. We should still have a few extras, but there are a very limited number of them. They are $10 each, so please let us know if you want one. We might be able to provide you an extra lunch if you didn't already order one. Tonight, after the end of the programming, we have a reception, which will be upstairs in the area where you just had breakfast. So there'll be a nice reception with drinks and hors d'oeuvres, so that should be good as well. And tomorrow, just a note, although we started at 9 o'clock today, tomorrow we're starting at 8:30, just so you don't come in half an hour late and realize, oops, I missed part of the program. As well as for questions, we will actually have a mic right in the center of the center aisle right there when it comes time for Q&A. For those of you online, you can also, there's a chat feature on your online screen, and you can also tweet us at the hashtag Women in Mars. So feel free to tweet questions in. We'll try to get to as many as possible. We can't guarantee we're going to answer every question, but we look forward to seeing all of your questions. A couple other logistical notes. I know many of you have laptops. Well, there are actually power outlets in your seats. So if you look on the sides, you will actually find power outlets. And just for you, also, people want to get online, there is free Wi-Fi here. So if you go to GW Event, enter the username Jack Morton, all lowercase, and the password is EventGuest11. So if you want to get onto the Wi-Fi here at GW. This conference would not have happened without our sponsors. First of all, I want to thank NASA for webcasting this event. I mean, this is a really great addition to our event, so thank you, NASA, for webcasting. I want to thank our silver sponsor, Aerojet. Thank you very much. Our reception sponsor, Boeing. Bronze sponsor, Google. Our education sponsor, United Space Alliance, and it was that sponsorship that brought a number of science teachers here today, so thank you very much. Thank you to our tote bag sponsors, Hamilton Sundstrand and Pratt & Whitney. We can thank breakfast today to Reactive Surfaces. Thank you to our supporting sponsors, Lockheed Martin and Phillips & Company, friend sponsor, Busick, our media sponsor, Space News, and I want to give particular thanks to the Space Policy Institute, who are kind of our host organization, without whom we could not have done this event. I also want to thank our other nonprofit sponsors, the Conrad Foundation, Women in Aerospace, the Planetary Society, IEEE, Women in Engineering, and the National Space Society. So that's it for all the logistical. So now I want to actually bring up the president of Explore Mars, Artemis Westenberg, to say a few words, and she'll also introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome you all this morning at this, for me, very exciting event Now, why is this an exciting event for me? I'm 53 years of age today, and, well, I'm not having my birthday today, but I'm 53 years old, and I've been involved in equality for women since the age of 18 in the Netherlands. I live in the Netherlands. I'm actually quite a well-known feminist, and so for the last 10 years, I've been involved in space advocacy. Not really ever mixing both. You know, most people that know me in space advocacy have no idea that I have another life next to that in the Netherlands. And so when this request came to organize this event, I was like, oh, that's fun. Both lives now finally come together. Also, why am I excited? Because I do believe that if half the population of this planet is female, then going to do space exploration, and especially exploration of a next heavenly body we could walk on and even probably live on, should also include women in a major way and not just as a footnote, knowing also that so many women already are involved as engineers. When the Mars exploration rovers were sent to Mars, I was given a video of a group of engineers building the rovers, and lo and behold, they were all females. And I think very few people realize that so many women are already, you know, doing important jobs and tasks in space exploration. And although, you know, 12 men walked on the moon, since then we've come a long way. But I also believe that perhaps in our PR to the outside world, we should tell more girls that, you know, this is not a male world. This is also a world that they can fit in. I have the pleasure of introducing Katie Coleman. And Katie, I can tell you the fact that you exist as a female astronaut made it a no-brainer to Samantha Cristoforetti, which after a long time having no female astronaut in the European Space Agency, since 2 years we finally have another one. And she told me in an interview that I had with her recently that for her it never was a question whether she could become an astronaut. I mean, there were female astronauts. She saw them, you know, going up into space, even, you know, being a pilot of a space shuttle. So apparently that was a route that was open to females, not something she had to worry about. So in that sense, even if, I think, and that goes for all of us, if we have leading positions in engineering or in research, even without us wanting to, the fact that we are there helps the next generations of females, but also of males, you know, of young men, to see that this is the world they're living in. And for that, I think we all have an important role, a role to shape the next future, the future of world of our next generations, which I do believe we want all to be, you know, participated by both genders equally. Now, talking about Katie Coleman, which I'm very pleased to announce, she's been an astronaut for quite a long time. I mean, 1992, that's nearly 20 years ago. She's been to the ISS twice, to space twice as on the Columbia. And it's easy to remember for me which STS they were, because they were 73 and 93. That was easy. And you also trained as a backup of STS 83. So, you know, you've been involved for a long, long time. You went for the first time in 1995. In 1999, again, you flew into space, this time as the specialist for the Chandra Space Telescope, which for scientists is a very important telescope, as it studies all those special effects that the universe gives us, you know, exploding stars, quasars, and that type of stuff. Now, this year, you were on the ISS for a couple of months, 5 or 6 months, I don't know exactly. So you've done a lot of hours in space. You also, I read, you've been so well involved with space. You've trained for so many missions to finally do the 26th this year. You trained at MIT, which is fun because, this professor here, Deva Newman, who was kind enough to lend her image in her own designed, tight spacesuit. This is not the bulky spacesuits we know of the ISS at the moment or of Apollo. This is a skin suit, as they are called. She has some pictures of herself posing in those suits she designed, and she was kind enough to lend those images to us to project her on Mars, because, as last conference, I had a picture of Buzz Aldrin with a reflection of Neil Armstrong taking a picture of Buzz on Mars. I think this time, because we're talking women on Mars, it should be a picture of a female on Mars. And, her in this suit at least makes her recognizable as a female, because very often, if the visors are down, I cannot tell whether there's a male or a female in that suit. And this also is like outreach. You tell people in one image, this is a reality. Females are astronauts. And if we go to Mars, it's not going to be men like the moon. It's going to be both genders. I'm convinced of that. Well, with no further ado, I would like to invite Katie up to this rostrum to give her speech to us, to tell us all about going to space.
Hello. Well, I'm delighted to be up here with Deva. Deva and I have been friends since I was an astronaut, and I was invited to MIT to talk to the freshmen about my first mission. And one of the parts of going to the Aeroastro department and giving this kind of seminar is that you get to eat lunch with the faculty on that day. And so it was in this room with 40 guys and me, and I see this blonde woman over in the corner, and I thought, I would like to meet her. But it was a busy day, and we never did. And then I get on the plane to Houston the next day, and there's Deva on the very same airplane. And we just both turn out to have a lot in common in terms of enthusiasm for what we do and a passion for exploration. And also, candidly, the place of art along with science in your life. Having this image up here, I think, is really important for the kind of outreach that I think all of us want to do. It's important. It worked on Samantha Cristoforetti. She grew up thinking she could be an astronaut. She's actually totally amazing. She's a fighter pilot. She speaks 19 languages. Certainly fluent, I think, in Russian, French, Italian, a little Chinese. I think she's adding Chinese in there. She's just amazing. And people like Samantha are growing up because some of us in this room have been doing what we have a passion to do. And I wanted to talk about why we're here, or why. I can only actually answer why I am here. And at first when I read Women in Mars, I thought, well, shouldn't we take the men too? And it's something we should consider, okay? And we can decide by the end of the of the conference. But I did think, well, gee, why are we going to do this? And and it's nice and thought-provoking. And then I looked at the list of people that were going to be here. And remember, I just came from spending 6 months in space with 5 guys most of the time, and sometimes 11 when the shuttle was there. And the thought of spending 2 days with a bunch of women passionate about space exploration, I couldn't sign up fast enough. So I seriously am here to be able to interact with a bunch of people, and I'm looking at some faces. I know we have a lot of faces online as well. Going to Mars is hard. This is not an easy thing, and there's a lot of different aspects to it. And to me, having flown on a mission where I get to look down and see the Earth, it's hard to think of myself as coming from any particular country. I just think of myself as one of the people that lives down here, and we need all different types of people with all different types of gifts in order to do something as hard as going to Mars. Now, the piece of this, I'm interested to hear in the coming speakers, about some of the reasons why or why not we have women participating, how to reach more girls and women, and really what are some of the challenges of going to Mars. My part in this is to talk to you as the people who are helping design, Mars missions and helping to get us there, because it's there. And Mars is there. It's in our solar system. It's accessible. We're making it accessible. We're developing the technologies that we need to develop in order to get there. And my job here today is to share with you some of the people aspects of living up there, of understanding what it's like to be away for a long time in a place that's isolated and a little dangerous, with the different mixes of men and women. And hopefully in your work, as we go further and further into space exploration, you'll keep some of these things in mind and at least be thinking about them, because people are going to go. And, there's things we have to do to make it habitable for the robots, but we need to make it habitable for the people too. And I think there's some surprising things that seem to make a difference to long duration and expeditionary crews. So if we could have the slides, and let's see. Okay, and can I get them up here too? Does that work? I see the clicker, but I don't see them on the podium here. They can think about that. Okay, so I start off with this picture of Tracy Caldwell, which is one of my favorites, because this is Tracy on her 6-month expedition, and she is kind of floating, kind of laying in the cupola, which is our module that has windows in all directions. And in some ways, when you come up into this, we have an Earth idea of having a cupola, like a sort of windowed place on the top of a building. And I think of it as being up, but actually we go down to get there. And so Tracy's really laying on the floor. But I love this picture because to me it just epitomizes the fact that, we're people. We're in a special place. We have people living in space. That space is Tracy's vantage point. It was my vantage point. It's been the vantage point of several hundred people. And it's where we live. We don't just live right here on the Earth. We live here and we live in the solar system. And I just love this picture that Tracy took. Well, in order to go on a mission like the ISS, there's a lot of different experiences that all add up to who you are when you float across the hatch. And I just wanted to share a few of them quickly that I had. And let's see, this is probably a point or two. So this is Antarctica, and if this is going to point... Not going to point. Well, right in the middle, do you see a little dirt thing right in the bottom there? That I have to point it out. So that was my camp in Antarctica, 200 miles from the South Pole, 6 weeks in a tent, and I was not a camping girl. Okay, seriously. And I loved it. I learned really a lot. This was our tents. We were on a meteorite expedition called ANSMET, Antarctic Search for Meteorites. And they nicely invite people like me along so that we can learn a little bit about what it's like to be on an expedition, to be isolated in circumstances where you have to be very safety conscious. And there's a lot of similarities to spaceflight. You live in a small place, you got to keep track of your stuff, you live with other people, and you have to learn how to get along, because the job that you're there to do is much more important than whether you are hungry or tired or in a bad mood or like your tent mate. And that's very much like living on the space station. And I have this slide that just shows some of my little things. My husband was very excited about me going on. I was a last-minute replacement for Sunny Williams on this trip because she was going to station. And my husband was very excited and very supportive, even though I got like 3 weeks' notice to go on this 3-month expedition. And I finally looked at him. I said, "Sweetie, do you realize I am not taking the baby with me?" The baby was 2. And there's our 4-person crew. And we, together with the 8-person crew that was elsewhere in Antarctica, we found 1,000 meteorites. And I learned a lot about myself and about what I needed to make an experience up in space worthwhile. I also lived in Aquarius. This is an underwater habitat that we have, we meaning NOAA, has off the coast of Florida, and lived there for 11 days underwater. My dad was a deep sea diver in the Navy and part of the Sea Lab program when men first lived under the sea. So it was very exciting to me to be part of this kind of exploration. And in some ways, we lived there for 11 days, 6 of us, two folks that actually know what they're doing and how to run the habitat, and then 4 of us that were on the expedition. You dive several hours a day. And in some ways, I loved being there. It can be a sort of Moon-Mars analog as well. There's a lot of things we could talk about with respect to that. But again, a very nice analog for space missions of some of the human things that you need to do in order to live there efficiently and get the job done. In some ways, I liked it almost a little more than space because we had neighbors. I mean, looking out the window at the food chain in action was just amazing, and all the life outside the window. And we did do some Moon and Mars analog studies. So, the space station. Every time you see this picture, oh, thank you very much, Kate. This picture with the space shuttle attached to the space station, that picture was taken by Paolo Nespoli on my crew, Paolo and Dima Kondratiev and I, in our Soyuz when we undocked from the space station. It's the first time we've ever undocked a Soyuz when a shuttle was present. And so whenever you see the shuttle attached to the station like that, that means that, excuse me, that was a picture that Paolo took when we were just within about an hour and a half of coming home. So I was part of Expedition 26 and 27. The way to figure that out is that we go up there in groups of 3 on the Soyuz, and we join a group of 3 that's already up there, and together we make a crew of 6. So we joined Scott Kelly, Sasha Kaleri, and Alex Kripochka, and we made a crew of 6 for Expedition 26, and there's the 6 of us. And then about 4 months into the mission, it was a 6-month mission, or 5.5, they left. It was time for them to go home, and then Ron Garin, Sasha Samonkutayev, and Andrei Borysenko came, and we became Expedition 27. And then when we left, Ron and those guys stayed up there, and so it continues and continues. The next crew launches to the ISS this Sunday. Dan Burbank from Cape Cod and his 2 Russian crewmates will launch to the space station. They'll join Mike Fossum, Sergei Volkov, and Satoshi Furukawa up there. So it's an international space station, as most of you probably know. And so there's our crew of 6 there. And so they'll be together for about a week and a half, and then Mike and his crew will come home. So it's a rotating thing, and this is our crew of 3, myself from the US, Paolo Nespoli from Italy, and Dima Kondratiev from Russia. And I have a little film, we're going to watch part of it, and mostly because my big goal here is to make living in space very real to you. And I like what video can do, where it just makes it a little more actual. Now, the part of the space station that we live on is this part. Even though this is more visually dominant, it's the power system, all the things outside that need cooled. But this is the Russian part of the space station. The US, we have a European module, a Japanese module. We talk about them in different sections, but as a crew, we're one international crew. We do some training ahead of time, space station training. You see that there's a big difference between this suit that you see here. This is preparing for launch, that suit that you see there, and Deva's skin suit here. And as we're getting ready to do these things, this is my Soyuz suit, which is actually made for me, and it is a pleasure. There's my son and my husband. This is the night of launch, getting ready, doing tests. But I will say that most of the equipment, it is a man's world still in the space business, and it'd be good to be designing things for all the sizes of folks that we have, and actually making your crewmates take short steps on the way to the launch pad. We had a little trouble with that. But here's launch. This is just a real quick, almost sort of highlight film. Last December, we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary of launching, 2 days after my 50th birthday. So this is a pretty great birthday present. And there we are up in orbit. Now the Soyuz is small, and people ask about the shuttle being so big, but it's a very intimate way to go to space. Your window is just 2 inches from your face, and suddenly after just 2 days, you're on board the space station right before Christmas. I love this shot right here because it shows you what it's like to fly up there. It's not about floating, it's about flying and living in a place where everybody flies from place to place. And I wake up every morning, and I love that part of it. Here's our Japanese supply ship, which Paolo Nespoli and I grappled with a robotic arm. It's only the second time that we've ever done that. And the first time was Nicole Stott. I grabbed the second one. It looks like Sonny Williams will grab the third HTV. And so it looks like maybe only girls can grab satellites. This is the European automated transfer vehicle. We were known as a mission that had so many visiting vehicles. We had the Japanese supply ship, the European supply ship, I think 3 Progresses, 2 space shuttles.
We have a tally-ho on the ISS out the front windows.
And I love that these are
That
real,
thing
this
is a
is
lot
not
bigger
animation.
since the last time I was here.
This is them looking at us, this is us looking at them.
Discovery station has you loud and clear on the big loop. What took you guys so long?
Yeah, they were a little
My
delayed.
call, initiating RPM. 3,
They're bringing up this
2,
module.
1, mark.
This is when we take those pictures. One of the most things I was the most nervous for, really, because there's only one chance to take them, and the crew is really depending on you taking accurate pictures to make sure that their space shuttle is safe for reentry. And so that's something that.
Station and Houston, Discovery is initiating final approach.
See our robotic arm there. They're going to attach here. This is the part that we live in there. And what's really interesting to me
Station and
is
Houston,
how people
Discovery
work
has
together.
capture confirmed.
Welcome. Hello. In some ways, this is kind of like when you have relatives visit and you're really excited to see them, but you hope they don't stay too long. And in this case, we actually loved having these guys come. I say guys, it was Nicole as well. A couple people who'd lived on the space station before, so they knew just what to do. And I was surprised. I didn't really feel like I'd missed people. This is our Robonaut that came up in that logistics module. There's my son's little tiger that hides out in some of these pictures. But the purpose of this guy is to understand the interaction of robots and humans, and I'm firmly convinced that we need both. Here we are flying through the lab, sped up just a little bit in this movie. This is the cabins that we live in. We'll see a little more of those later. Some, living in space, cutting the guy's hair. It's kind of interesting to me. This is our table. You'll notice it's not horizontal. It was for many years, like 10 years it was horizontal, but it gets in the way when you're trying to fly from here to there. And Paolo had the idea that we should put it at a slant because nothing's really going to fall off the table. So this is Ron and his crew coming up, Sasha and Andre, who we don't really know all that well.
Glad to see you.
The training is so busy that you really don't get to spend all that much time together. I show this in the video because it shows our little cabins. This is preserving some of the samples. We talk about a lot of the biomedical research that we do, but if you want to take samples, you have to be able to preserve them in a freezer. There's that's the Mississippi
Houston on the big
River.
loop. We're tally-ho with the station.
And the second space shuttle coming. So the first one brought a big module. This one brought the alpha magnetic spectrometer.
Dima! Welcome on board the station.
And this is Mark Kelly. So it was kind of funny because we had Scott Kelly there for 4 months, and then his brother came, Mark. And somehow you have sort of a visual and just a familiarity. I mean, Scott
Welcome
and I lived
aboard the
together
space
for 4
station,
months,
Your
and then this guy who
Holiness.
looks just like him comes. The Pope had a conference with us. And of course, a little fun with food. But food is so important, and we're going to get to that in a few minutes. This is Greg Shamatov, our 2 Russian compatriots. This was really good Italian food that they brought up, and we were so happy. I tell people all the food is ugly, but it tastes okay, and that nobody really goes for the food. I mean, and if they do, they've made a big mistake. But it's amazing. All this is food logistics. We'll see a little more of that in a couple minutes. I mean, the part of food that's hard is that you have to open all these packages. Everything you want to put on your plate, you have to open a package. Eating is a pain. And a lot of people lose weight just because eating is a pain. It just takes time and logistics. But here we are up in the cupola. And I'm a flute player, so I brought my flute up there. And I'd like you to see this
So I can see too.
this view out the window that we have. We keep the window shades covered just
see
for
that
micrometeorite damage.
We're in a simply
And this is our rescue ship.
amazing place.
And I did a duet with Ian Anderson of the band Jethro Tull, which many of you here probably are not old enough to remember that band. this, I mean, this has gotten a lot of attention, and I think it's because it underlines that real people doing real things that they need to do are up in space. He introduced it at a concert in Russia on the anniversary.
Thanks, Colonel Catherine Coleman in the International Space Station. We should remember that today's cosmonauts, scientists, and astronauts are still every bit the rocket heroes they were 50 years ago. So, from the cultural city of Perm in Russia, let's salute Katie, Dima, and Paolo up there in orbit, and of course, the legendary Yuri Gagarin. Go safely.
So that was the 50th anniversary of spaceflight. I actually only took this flute apart once I got it up there, because I was so afraid I'd lose the pieces. I mean, it's one of the terrifying things about being up there is losing things. The logistics of keeping track of your stuff are huge. Not just your stuff, but the experiment stuff. You lose the one, the little cable that goes from your favorite hard drive to your computer, and how you try to keep track of that and bring it with you when you pack. But you could go to the store and get another one if you lost it on a trip. Well, you lose, a unique cable up there, and you could be looking for months and never find it. And so keeping track of things and not losing them is a really big deal. But let's go just quickly through some of the things I think you saw what it's like to live up there. This is getting ready, and I like this picture because it shows you that in terms of flying with the Russians, it really is a different world, so to speak. And there was a lot of changes, a lot of differences, but as three people who got to know each other really well, we became, a crew who spoke, there's a Russian expression, who speak with half a word. We all spoke both English and Russian. And it's pretty neat that you get to get a little closer to things over there, which I like. And we got to actually be, this is our rocket that's going to go up like a week from that day. They carried out on a train. And this is the training that we did to get ready. This is a Robonaut. Now, Robonaut is, here with a lot of planetary people, there's a lot of very sophisticated robots out there, here on the Earth, and some up in space as well, much more sophisticated in some ways than this guy. And the purpose of this guy is to learn how to interact with robots up in space, how humans can work hand in hand with them. It's actually a joint project with General Motors, who's interested in this from the assembly line point of view of understanding how people and robots will interact. And so we learned how to program him and how to get him to, how to change the programming real time, because that was faster than the scientists and engineers changing it from the Earth. And if you've ever programmed a Lego robot, they actually patterned it, maybe on purpose, maybe not, after that kind of programming. But because I have some Lego robot experience, I was pretty quick at learning how to control this guy. We do a lot of training on the ground to understand the experiments and how to do them exactly the way they need to be done. And some of these slides I'm showing you because, you look at this Deva in her spacesuit, and now you look at Paolo, who's, I think, 6'2", and there's me, and we both wear basically the same size suit. And it's not by choice. It's partly because we used to have small suits, and we chose not to support them because it was basically too much money to support all sizes of suits. And so the small suit got eliminated, and they said, "What size do you wear?" I said, "Medium." I mean, is there another answer when the small is eliminated? And so you learn to work in a suit that is too big, and to I think candidly, I'm probably the smallest person qualified in the spacesuit, and Samantha, who we just talked about, is just amazing and awesome, but she's about my size, maybe a tiny bit bigger, I'm not sure. And it doesn't mean that we can't work in those big spacesuits, but there are. There may not be as many ways for us to do things as there is for the bigger people. And so there's some tricks to doing things, and they're not secrets. We try to share them with everyone we know. But, we do have the equipment that we have to go to space right now, and so we adapt to it. But that doesn't mean that when we're designing new stuff, we can't make sure that we're really addressing the anthropometrics of the whole world. The spacesuit is a lot easier to handle up in space. I mean, I can move that whole suit around, and I have to be careful because it does weigh about 300 pounds. And so if I send that sailing up on the space station, I will break whatever it is it runs into if it's fragile, and I could also damage the suit. So moving large objects, we have to be very careful. But down there, but then there's also the training aspect of training down on the Earth. If you design really heavy equipment, how are we going to work with that down here on the Earth and still understand how to work with it up in space? I'm just doing this with the helmet. It's actually the helmets are very, very heavy, and it's actually putting on the helmet in 1G is almost unrelated to what it takes to put it on in 0G. So we're always trying to think what is simulated here and what is not. And I just like this picture of our Russian spacesuits. So launching last December from Baikonur in Kazakhstan, I wanted to talk about the family aspect of things. Sometimes I get some attention because I'm a mom and I, left my family back here on Earth, and even during training, people would say, "Oh, how does it feel to be away from your son during all this time?" And part of me wants to say, do you ask the guys these questions? Because they actually don't. And it's wrong for two reasons. One, the guys miss their kids and their spouses just as much. They really do. And two, it's I think a sacrifice, and yet we're doing this because we think the work that we do is important. And so when you think about Mars missions, when we think about the Mars 500 folks that just got out of the habitat there, if you asked me would I like to do that, usually my hand is up for everything. I'm not sure I'd like to practice my 1.5 years of being away and then be away for 1.5 years. It's like practicing bleeding. And yet, we need to learn those things. Now, since I'm probably not one of the people that would go to Mars, but I have a background in, being up there and what was important and what was not to me, would I go and be one of the people that helps them learn things in something like Mars 500? Maybe. But when we think about analogs and we think about what we want people to do, how much we want to test the crew that's really going to go, realize that all that training and all those practices involve family sacrifice as well. And when in terms of going to the space station again, living up on the space station, I would have stayed up there another 6 months in a minute, in a heartbeat. My husband and I had discussed it. Partly because once you're up there, you feel really useful once you learn how to do things and you want to get a lot of work done. And partly because it's getting ready that's really the hard part. And I could either stay up there and have another 6 months, which wasn't actually a question, or I can come back to Earth, do a bunch of groundwork which needs done, which I'm happy to do, be in line again, spend another 1.5 years or so, 2 years maybe, training for a mission, and then go to space again when, it would be nice to do it all at once. But it wasn't really the way the plan was. So this is my husband, Josh, and my son, Jamie. And that's on launch day. This is Jamie and I in front of my pitiful-looking tree that we planted. We plant trees in Baikonur. It's a really nice tradition where something grows. You leave the Earth and something grows while you're gone. We planted these in December, so we weren't so sure about the growing part. And there's supposed to be a no smooching rule, but and it is hard to leave them behind. I'm a big fan as a commuting mom. I live in Houston. My husband lives in Massachusetts, and it doesn't fix everything, and it's definitely different than what most people have. But we really try hard to be connected in a family way, using Skype, using photos, talking on the phone, reading stories. I read stories from space. I read stories from the road when I was training in Japan and Russia and Europe. So different ways to be present, even if it's just getting everything organized for them for the winter before you go. So there's different ways to be present. So the space station. We already talked about how, the part that we live in there. I like to show, this view here where you don't really see the Earth, you just see the station, and you can think about the engineering involved in living in space. And one of the things that I liked about being up there, people think it's really small. They're thinking of the Soyuz. I liked the fact that it was big. There's actually quite a lot of privacy and quite a lot of mental space from each other. And I'm not sure we're going to have that luxury on a Mars mission. I would doubt that we do. And so we have to maybe temper some of our ISS lessons with that fact. This is just all the pieces laid out. And our crew of 6 up there, we're just about to watch a Friday night movie. Thinking about what the crew can do together, needs to do together, it was pretty challenging to pick out movies that everybody could watch and think were funny or interesting. From a language point of view, from a culture point of view, it was challenging. And this is just a little tour. It should be coming up. It's not the same movie, but just shows the space station. Mike Fossum did this little tour. It's about 2 minutes long. And so here we are coming into Node 3, and this is the treadmill here. Everything's at right angles. Here's the toilet right in here, and then 90 degrees off, this is the weightlifting machine up here, and then down here is the cupola. And so all three of those things are in one space, okay? And one of the guys, when he came up, I was on the weightlifting machine, which we do for at least an hour a day, I'd say 5 days a week, maybe 6 or 7. Now we're back in Node 1, looking into the permanent logistics module. But I was on the weightlifting machine, and he looks at me, he goes to, he's sort of in that module, so he's either going to be on the treadmill or in the bathroom, and he's not wearing his running stuff. And he says, "So you're going to be there long, Kate?" I said, this is just the way it is. I'm going to be here, and I'm going to pretend you're not there, and you're going to be there, and you're going to pretend I'm not here. It's just what we have to do. And it works out. I wanted you to see where we live. At first, I thought we have a huge space station. Why do 4 of us have to live within 3 feet of each other? Here's our little cabins. Having a place of your own is supremely important, I think, mentally for people. Having a place to put your stuff, that it's not in somebody else's way, that you're not moving around somebody else's things or interfering with their things. People, and they've seen this on Aquarius as well, people need to have their own little piece of real estate that is theirs. This is now looking at the Japanese module, and this little tour was made as a kind of a joke when they heard that they were going to have to stay up there a little bit longer. Ron and his crew, Mike Fossum made this video. He's like searching the space station for Ron, and you'll see we'll find Ron at the end here. Now we've already been through here, so they speed up the video coming back through the lab. There's our diagonal table up through Node 1. You have to be careful when you do this because actually, you weigh 100 or whatever pounds, and when you bang your knee on something, it really hurts. So now we're in the Russian part of the space station, and there's Sasha and Sergei and Andrei, and we didn't put the sound on here, and you see the roll of duct tape. Duct tape is supremely necessary up there. But you see that there's just sort of stuff everywhere. There's pictures that are important to people. There's cords. There's, and it looks like it's a mess, but it's actually not. Everything's got a place, and everybody needs to know where the place is. And for me, as a person who could lose the TV remote twice in an evening, living up there is challenging, seriously. And so one of the things I have to really pay attention to is putting things back in their places and making sure that they stay. So now we're heading back. This is the central post, the sort of central brain of the Russian segment. Now we're heading back towards the U.S. segment, but we're going to go either down or up, I guess up, into the Soyuz that is Ron's Soyuz. And it's funny, when you get kind of turned around, everything looks a little bit funny. I'm going into the Soyuz, and these hatches are smaller on the Russian segment. Now we're going into the Soyuz, and there is Ron playing the Going Home Blues. Okay. And that was our 6-person crew with, this is Ron who was playing there. And this picture was taken on the 12th of April, the same night that Ian Anderson debuted that flute duet, because it was the 50th anniversary of human spaceflight. And this is the crew that's up there right now, although Ron and his compatriots have come home, but these guys are landing a couple days before Thanksgiving. That's Mike Fossum who did that video you just saw, and Satoshi and Sergei Volkov. Cabins that we talked about. It's just really, I mentioned I didn't understand why we all had to live so close, but when an alarm rings in the middle of the night, you actually really do want to all know where everybody is, and you want to all assess whatever's going on at the same time. We didn't have any spacewalks planned, so we were praying for an alarm that made us have to go outside and fix something. And we got such an alarm, like in the middle of the night, and Scott raced to our central computer, looked at it, and said, "Yes!" And then it turns out we had an inside replacement for that. It wasn't an outside replaceable part. We were really disappointed. And I joked around with Mission Control that we had spacesuits on, not helmets on, but spacesuits were already on. We celebrated Christmas. I mean, we as a crew we pick holidays, and have to pick us, and we can't actually have all of everybody's holidays. There's just not enough time. The toolbox the most important thing on the space station except the bathroom. You know, somebody was just saying in Antarctica, you never have the right screwdriver. Excuse me. You know, you've got to have the right tools. There has to be enough of them. You need to have extras. Things are going to get lost. You can't have just one of anything that's important in a place where everything's going to float around if it gets lost. And this is for Penny Boston. We were talking about the importance of, earrings. I mean, you get to bring a bunch of stuff up there with you, 1.5 kilograms, about 3 pounds, and I thought, I can bring a lot of earrings for 1.5 kilograms. These are little nuts and bolts floating there, and whenever I had to fix something big, then I would wear them for luck. And this is what I was talking about, things just floating around. I mean, when you start to go into some cavity and unpack something that's at the bottom, I mean, you can put the first thing under one arm, the second thing under the other arm, but now you're holding on with your toes, and the thing that's between your legs is precarious, and there's only so many things you can hold. They all have to have some kind of Velcro or something on them to be able to not get lost. Going in and out of the freezer. Hair washing, not a problem. This kind of stuff, I mean, it's really not a problem, but you do want to pay attention to having the right stuff. Right now I'm evaluating towels for future use on the space station and other expeditions. It is important to have some of the right tools, so to speak. The Russian wet towels were the most supreme, amazing thing. There's guys that when they come back will talk about them, with just reverence. Oh, the Russian wet towels, we love them. And the U.S. wet towels, I mean, they're not rough. I mean, you try to do your back, it's just slimy. I mean, it's just, you have to hydrate them, they're dry, you put water in a package, you have to wait. We have towels that are all dehydrated, so they look like a little hockey puck, and then you put water on that and it becomes a towel. But you need a towel now, and now that towel is wet. And I mean, there's a lot of different ways to approach the problem, and it's those kinds of things, and those little hockey pucks don't have any Velcro on them, so they're always getting lost. And then you feel bad because they shouldn't get lost. So, that kind of hygiene, having the right equipment, these are small things. And I know that here in this room, we're talking about the big picture, and we just want to get people off this planet, do our intermediate steps, to the moon, to asteroids, whatever makes sense to develop the technology that we need to get to some place like Mars. But even though you've got to work on that bigger picture, you have to keep the smaller picture in mind as well when you're talking about having people take part. And I think that the solution is going to be people and robots together. Just one doesn't do it, and we'll need both. And there's just Paolo, I thought Paolo would cry. Oops, work my pointer here. These sad little things, those are Italian vegetables. Saddest thing on the space station. I mean, it takes just as long to hydrate these measly little 3 pieces of whatever as it does to hydrate your nice big macaroni and cheese. And so, we seldom ate them. Just sitting around eating. There you see our horizontal table in the way. People would always get a little bonked as they would go by there, watching TV together. We talk about doing science and space on people. It's a pain in the butt. I mean, there's a lot involved. It's a little easier, actually, than down here sometimes because all this stuff doesn't weigh anything. But it's involved. It's hard. You're tied up. You feel a little picked on. I'm really generous with this kind of stuff. I sign up for everything. I don't mean to brag that I'm generous. It's just that I really believe in these experiments, and I don't mind being uncomfortable or all those things. And you feel, even I just feel a little beat up when somebody says, oh yeah, we forgot you did that last week. We could have combined it, but now you have to do it again. You're like, okay. And just the fact that we're people and we need to have a little fun. This is an old shot of a shuttle crew up there with Susan Helms and Jim Foss and Yuri Ustachov were the second space station crew. The all-important bathroom. We don't even need to talk about it. You know how important it is. I mean, and don't bring just one. When the bathroom breaks, we stop work, okay? Everything, I mean, that doesn't take everybody to fix it, but one person will stop and immediately fix the bathroom. And then just to finish up here, this is that cupola that we talked about, and this is that sort of up and down orientation that you think about when actually, with respect to the Earth, which is here, this is really what the cupola looks like. So you're sort of upside down, looking down at the Earth way down here, taking pictures. And I'm from Massachusetts, so you get to see Cape Cod. And I like having the cupola, having these windows, not just one single window above your head where you see things just kind of go by. It's like looking out your window in the car with blinders on out the side window and things just go by. But by having the windows all the way around, you really get to see things coming, and then they're there, and then they're leaving in the distance. And you really get to feel like you've been there. Long Island. And then I'll end with, let's see, this picture of Italy at night. And then I just wanted to show you, my husband's a glass artist, but to me it's about that art and science and the fact that, doing something like Mars, which is so hard, takes passion. It takes romance almost. I mean, it takes really wanting to do things for emotional reasons. And I think art is a part of that. We want to go to places that we imagine like this that are out there. I mean, there's oceans, wild things on the planets, amazing structures that they built for some reason. I had some of his planets up in space. And this is the other reason that we're here. Is not for frogs, although we do wonder about life on Mars, of course, and other places, but is the kids and the outreach. I mean, I love this picture, and maybe if you don't know my son, it doesn't speak to you, but he's so curious about everything, and especially when he was little, just that wonder and delight when they see something new, and they understand, and they realize that this is something different that they can learn about. I mean, they're just so pleased with themselves for discovering, and I think we can't forget that. So I'd like to just finish there with landing and just say that it's very nice to be back on the Earth. I loved my view of the Earth. I loved being up there. And at the same time, it's been really nice to be back, especially a place as beautiful as Massachusetts. I've gotten to do a lot of telework, all my debriefings and stuff like that I did in Houston, but then I've gotten to do a lot of the work that I need to do up in Massachusetts. And it's so beautiful up there, and it's actually very nice to be part of the view again. And to really feel like I'm in the middle of the view. And these are some other things you can keep in mind when you're thinking about how are people going to leave the planet, what means of propulsion, how long are they going to be gone, what are they going to do, what's it like for them. I just urge you to put yourself in the shoes of somebody living up someplace as magical as the space station and realize that it's magic every day. It's stress and pressure every day. It's wonderful to be up there. You want to stay. And at the same time, home is something that I think we're always going to want to come back to. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I'll take a couple of questions, and then a quick break while the panel assembles. Is that right? Okay. Thank you. And I guess even though it's small, we're going to use the mic for online. Is that correct, or does it matter? Or I can repeat the questions, too, if anybody has one. Everybody needs the coffee break. It's a good idea.
A question. How do people stay healthy, and what do you do if somebody gets sick? How do you keep the air clean?
Well, we're learning a lot about those things. Actually, bone loss, one of my things that's near and dear to my heart is what we're learning about osteoporosis when we're up there. We lose bone at about 10 times the rate of your average 70-year-old osteoporotic woman. So about 1% a month. It's really big if we don't exercise. And we're also we've looked at new kinds of exercise equipment, we've looked at diet, perhaps the balance of salt, the ratio of potassium to animal fat is another thing that people are looking at. So people are looking at all these things. You can't look at all of them at once. But we do have a new exercise machine from the past couple of years, and people are coming back with much improved bone loss. And I can only speak for my very own bone loss, but I exercise 5 days a week. Probably 6 is a better average of what I did. And I also took a sort of routine osteoporosis drug because I go up there as a 50-year-old woman with probably the lowest bone density to start with than anybody that goes. And so it just made sense to go ahead and try this. And so I came back with basically 0 change in the amount of bone that I had. So 0 change in bone density. And so that's huge, but you have to really qualify that. It doesn't mean my bones didn't change. One of the current theories is that with your bones, the sort of meaty middle is what is actually dissolving, so to speak, up there in space. And then when you exercise, you're building back that sort of pipe on the outside. So the pipe comes back thicker, but the inside structural is different. Now, is that worse? We don't know. And so, I'll have bone scans every year for the rest of my life, and which I think will be interesting. So those are, you don't want to look at those. Is it the drug that I took? It was a pretty ordinary osteoporosis drug. Maybe, and I think we'll have that data fairly soon because we have a lot of people who are taking the drug and exercising. We have people who are just exercising, and I think we'll get to understand that pretty quickly. So that's one of the ways that we stay healthy. But those environmental systems, filtering the air, we have backups for all those kinds of things. But we are still learning. And let me I know we need to go here, Chris, but one of the biggest points is the environmental system. We recycle all of our water, kind of grosses the kids out, but we recycle all that stuff. And that's a system that was designed by intelligent engineers down here on the Earth. And these folks are good at what they do. And you know what? It doesn't work like they expected. Things go through filters differently. Things get clogged up differently. We are learning tons about that recycling system. And that's something that's really essential to be able to go on, to these other places and to Mars. And so, I want to just really focus you on the fact that it's not going to be one thing that we design and then we go. It's a very iterative process that takes patience. And I think we need to take advantage of the places that we can, like the space station, like the analogs that we have, to understand things about people, but also things about equipment. Hey, Penny.
Can I go ahead? I was interested in your comments about conducting the scientific experiments being a giant pain in the butt, or could be a giant pain in the butt. How much of that do you think is because you guys are conducting the research on behalf of other PIs? Or, would you have a different feeling if you were conducting your own experiments?
Well, let me qualify that, because we say science, and that could mean, and actually what I meant to say was that doing some of the medical experiments that involved myself, taking samples on me.
Poking yourself.
And that's just one part of the science that we do.
Yeah.
And that was the part that I was trying to address. We actually do all those tests before the flight. Maybe at launch minus 6 months, then at launch minus 3 months, and then launch minus 2 weeks. Or, there's different iterations for different experiments. I'm not going to do that with my bone density every month, but maybe my VO2 max, maybe, different levels of different things. And we also are backups for the mission. So I'm a backup, and then I'm the prime. And so I've already done all those tests as the backup, and then I do them again as the prime, and we haven't even gone to space yet. And so even as somebody who really does sign up for everything and actually, don't mind being poked, I could take my own blood in 3 minutes. That's what we do all the time. You can have other people do it, but it's just faster to do it myself. You really start getting a little testy, like if you figure out that somebody, you could have done it just once, partly because it takes so long to do anything up there. Doing anything more efficiently, especially when it involves something where now you're all made up like this and you can't be on the treadmill maybe, or you can't be inside that furnace taking that sample out because you've got hardware on. I had 24-hour, 12-lead monitoring, all the time, different times, and 24-hour blood pressure monitoring things. And so that makes it so you can't do some other experiments. So when that's done inefficiently, we could get testy. But I don't want to overplay that point in that there's 150 different science experiments that we did up there, which I didn't talk about. Everything from fluid physics to crystal growth to metallurgy. I'm not even thinking of the best list right now. The fluid physics is a really interesting one to me, because we can understand what we're finding is that if we change a vessel, the walls of the vessel, just by a couple of degrees, we can guarantee that the fluid in that vessel is all in the wall, all in that corner. And so that's a really valuable thing for understanding how much fuel you have in your tank on your way to Mars. And it's a really simple fluids experiment that we're doing. And so there's that satisfaction. But the other time that we care about transporting fluids is the bathroom. So what if you had a toilet hose that didn't have a motor associated with it, where just by the nature of the geometry of the hose, everything inside went to the right place, and it was one less moving part. So there's all sorts of really neat science that we're doing up there. And I think your original question was, would you feel differently if it was your science? For me, no. I feel passionately about the people whose science I'm doing, and I feel like I am their advocate up there. And a lot of times the crew members are the people almost in between them and the ground system that might not understand so much about what that scientist is doing, but you as the person who's been trained to do it, understand what you might need to hang on to and insist on a little bit better. So long answer to a short question.
Yeah, no, that's good. It sounds like you actually embrace this and feel like a collaborator, really,
Absolutely.
on these
Yes.
experiments.
Yes.
During the 6 months, how did your menstrual cycle change? And to the extent that it did change, did it later stabilize? And then second, how did your dreams change?
Well, the first one, I think I'm in the not applicable category. I tell people, I had surgery and I rearranged my living room and I had all the furniture removed that I didn't need anymore. So that just doesn't apply to me. For different, it is actually a valid question though for, just different cultural things. The Russians are convinced that women on their cycle are going to ruin the toilet. And they have to go and use the Soyuz toilet. Can't use the Russian toilet. Now, we have the exact same toilet, okay, on the U.S. side. Turns out we could use it. So it's an interesting question. And, it's just like one logistical thing. Different people deal with it different ways. Some people choose to just, not have that going on, take some drugs and not have that going on. Everybody deals with it differently. I can't speak for anybody else. And your second question, which Chris is getting nervous, so we should be fast.
How did your dreams change?
Well, I dreamed about floating for quite a while after I came home, that's for sure. And up there, it's hard to say.
Thank you.
Can we do this last one, Chris? Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Because she was brave.
I'm wondering what opportunities you had and what choices you made that led you to become an astronaut.
Well, Chris is looking at me like, this can't be a long answer because we need, because we do want to move. I think you're going to really, I can't wait to see the panel. I'll just say that I think sometimes when you see people like me and people that you're going to see sit at this table who are very successful and seem to have they must be people who were either just picked and chosen and always meant to do that thing, and they always knew which way to turn, right or left, what college to go to, what internship program, whether to do this or not, whether to get married or when to have kids, all those things. And I can only speak for myself and say that, those choices are hard and you don't ever know that you're making the right choice. You just have to make the one that makes the most sense for you at the time, and at least in my opinion. And part of that, I think, as women, is making sure that I think it is still a different world out there for women, and I think you want to be really sure that you have your credentials, that when you say, I should have this job, that you can show on paper through experience, that you are qualified to do this work. It's not actually fair that some guy that just looks like he might be a better construction worker could not have to do that, but the fact is I think that women need to be on paper very, very qualified. That's still a world where you might have to enlighten people as to your capabilities. And in closing, that's what we're here for today and tomorrow, is just to realize that women do bring some different things to the equation. Our crew was different because we had 5 guys and 1 woman. We each had different roles. Some of them were stereotypical and some of them were not. And I just think that people make the world work. People make hard missions like this work, and I firmly believe that women bring some skills that sometimes are underappreciated, and at the same time, that doesn't mean that you as a person with a passion don't have to insist that you be included, because you do bring some very valuable things to the team. Even if they're not recognized, it's important to bring them, and it's right to bring them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Katie. That was great. Some really wonderful videos. Really amusing to see all those. I don't think I'd seen about half of them. I've seen a few of them, but a lot of them are really great. Can we please have our first panel up? Take your seats and we'll get going. This first panel was actually the question that was asked, this pretty much started this whole, was the motivation for this whole conference. As I mentioned earlier, Rebecca Kaiser and I were chatting several months ago. You can come up the steps right here. About the demographics in the space community and if there actually were more women working in Mars exploration than other areas of the space community. It was our impression that there were, but we didn't know if that was true or not, if it was just a false assumption based on anecdotal information that we both shared. So really looking forward to this particular panel. And so I'd like to introduce our moderator today, Colleen Hartman, who's actually stepping in for Rebecca today. Rebecca had to go off to a meeting, had a last-second meeting with the NASA administrator today, so Colleen's agreed to step in as moderator. Colleen has an amazing history. Currently, she's the Assistant Associate Administrator for the Science Mission Director at NASA. She's held numerous impressive positions at NASA. She's also served for a while as a professor here at GWU as a space policy professor. Prior to NASA, she worked at NOAA, where she was a Deputy Associate Administrator, and she was also the division director for the NASA Planetary Science missions, where she helped spearhead the New Horizons mission to Pluto. She's also worked on Capitol Hill. She worked at OSTP, and she's won an amazing number of awards, including the highest civil servant award, the Presidential Rank Award of Meritorious Senior Executive. I actually need to mention this also because it's kind of interesting. In addition to having a master's and a PhD in physics, she also has a degree in zoology. So I'll be curious if that comes into play in your day-to-day work at NASA. So, ladies and gentlemen, Colleen Hartman. You're very welcome. Oops, sorry.
No problem. Thanks so much for that introduction, Chris. Yeah, some say NASA headquarters might be a zoo, so it comes in handy. So we have four extremely impressive women here on the panel, and so let me just introduce them to kick this off. Here is Dr. Linda Billings. She's a research professor here at George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs. She performs communications research for astrobiology at the Science Mission Directorate, is also a commentary editor for the journal Science Communications. Linda has worked for more than 30 years in Washington, D.C. as a researcher, journalist, freelance writer, communications planner, manager and analyst, policy analyst, and consultant to the government. As a researcher, she has worked on communications strategy, media analysis, and audience research for NASA's astrobiology program, Mars exploration program, and planetary protection program. As a journalist, she has covered energy, environment, and labor relations, as well as aerospace. Next is Tiffany Montage. She manages Google's space initiatives, including collaborative relationships with NASA and the Google Lunar X Prize, a $30 million competition in which privately funded teams compete to land and operate a rover on the moon. Tiffany is Google's spokesperson for space issues, and she provides strategic direction in space-related programs. Tiffany spent many years in the Air Force as an officer assigned to the Air Force Research Lab and the NRO. While at the NRO, Tiffany spent several years in flight test engineering, operating sensors aboard the WB-57 aircraft. Tiffany was initially convinced that she did have the best job in the world until she joined Google, and they gave her the title, quote, Intergalactic Federation, King Almighty and Commander of the Universe. That really is her title. It's even on her business card in impressively tiny font. Next up is Dr. Susan Niebuhr. She's a researcher and mission consultant in space sciences. She's trained in meteoritics and cosmic ray astrophysics. She spent 5 years at NASA headquarters leading 7 RNA programs. She's been program scientist on Dawn and Discovery program scientist. I'm very happy to say that I hired her away from a colleague who really hasn't forgiven me yet. She worked with others to create NASA's first postdoc early career fellowship for planetary science. She left NASA for a field more flexible in consulting. And her work now encompasses studying past planetary science missions for lessons learned, publishing in space policy, and working on her forthcoming book on the history of NASA's small planetary missions. Isolated due to illness, she has become an expert in the use of social media and speaks frequently at conferences on how to use blogs, Twitter, and other social media to bring about social change. Susan founded womeninplanetaryScience.com to bring together women in the field and to bring career development issues out from whispered hallway conversations into the mainstream discourse. Last but not least is Dr. Catherine Conley. She has actually the other great job title being NASA's Planetary Protection Officer since 2006. Before that, Cassie's research at the Ames Research Center focused on biochemistry and evolution of muscle tissue. Her extended work explores the adaptation of multicellular organisms to extreme environments, including the Atacama Desert and the Arctic tundra. Cassie has been involved in several spaceflight experiments with nematode worms, including one experiment which was flown on the last mission of the Space Shuttle Columbia. Flight hardware was recovered after the tragic accident, and when it was opened, the space-flown experimental animals were actually still alive, findings of considerable relevance to planetary protection. She received her PhD in plant biology from Cornell and 2 BSs, which you might be interested in hearing about for life sciences and humanities, because her majors were Russian and French literature and a minor in music performance. So welcome to our panel. I think I may do one other thing to kick this off and say why we are so excited, everyone is, in going to Mars, and that's in 17 days, NASA will be launching a mission to Mars, 17 days from today, the Mars Science Lab. And if you could turn down the lights and roll the film, and I hope you have sound on the film. I think it might be a good way to kick this off. Can you turn the lights down, perhaps? So we're going to launch on an Atlas 541, 4 strap-ons. I cut this down so it would fit in 2 minutes. We have 5 times more mass here than the rovers, 10 times more science instruments. You're looking at the entry, descent, and landing. This is our 7 minutes of terror. This is a 15-foot heat shield, the biggest heat shield ever. You'll see ballasts come off to change the center of gravity. This is because we're landing more accurately than we've ever landed before because of using lift as we come through Mars's thin atmosphere. Now we have to get to, there go the ballasts. We have to reorient it then. You have to get to about Mach 2 before you can release the parachutes. There it goes. They're Viking heritage. In order to slow it down through the atmosphere. You can see Mars below. You can see that stuffed up in there is the actual rover, gets released from the back shell, and you have powered rockets. This is the first time we've ever done anything this way, 8 of them, in order to help us slow down and land gently, we hope. So once we're in a position, this back shell will orient us. Hopefully we'll be right in the landing ellipse at Gale Crater, a fascinating area of Mars with a tall mountain on it. You see Mars. So as long as all has gone well, we have radar sensing the ground continually. The rover gets lowered on a sky crane. These are 3 nylon umbilical cords. One carries data and power through it. The other 3 are support. There you see the 6 wheels, which are rock and pinion wheels, just like we had on the Spirit and Opportunity rovers. At touchdown, it knows it's touchdown for 2 seconds. This guy flies away and lands, crash lands into Mars safely. The rover then is ready to roll. So in 17 days, we launch. This will happen in August, around August 5th or 6th, if we launch on the first window day So hopefully one day people will be going along as well, but for now, this is the most ambitious project we've got, going to Mars to investigate the red planet. So now let's start with our panel, and I was going to start by asking them a few questions, and start thinking of your own, because this will be really audience participation. It is important to note that men went to the moon, but everyone will be going to Mars. So we know that times have changed. TV and the internet have introduced all kinds of broad interest in things, and broad to a much broader range of people. So NASA created this systematic study of Mars, and we hope to send people one day, and hopefully people can see themselves, as Kathy said, and in the adventure at Mars. So I'd like to ask the panel members, in what way are you part of the Mars community, and perhaps describe the first time you made a personal connection with the planet Mars, or some other part of exploration and the solar system. Linda, would you like to take that? And then I'll let anybody jump in.
And at some point, I do have some slides I want to show, but not in response to this question.
Yes, so we'll come back to that.
Probably about 15 years ago, when I started working with astrobiology and planetary protection on communication issues, I sort of had to approach that job like I would as a journalist, and had to teach myself a lot about what was going on in the field, and it's inherently engaging. It's inherently interesting, because there are more questions to be answered than questions that have already been answered. And as is typical in any field of research, every question that's answered generates maybe 10, a dozen new questions to be answered. And this is the way that Mars missions proceed. They get more and more complex, and the scientific mission of any particular project gets more and more complex. It's just, I'm a curious person, like Katie's son. I was the one who, when I was a child, drove my mother insane by saying, but why, but why, but why? And finally, the final answer was, because I said so. But luckily, I found outlets as I went through school, graduated from college, entered the workplace for my curiosity. This is why when I first came to Washington, I became a journalist, because it was a perfect profession for a nosy person like me. And I've just gotten more sophisticated in pursuing my nosiness over the years, and continue to be engaged in the very broad enterprise of Mars exploration. And my one of my missions these days is to encourage my colleagues in the space community to think about the contributions that the social sciences and humanities can make to that broader cultural enterprise of space exploration.
Does anybody else like to just add, and then we'll go to each of your presentations next?
Are we all talking
Go
about
ahead.
what inspired us to
Sure.
be involved in space? Okay, great. I like to talk about me. So I wanted to be an astronaut. As a young girl growing up in England, and so I did all the right things that you should do, take the right path. I joined the Air Force. I went to a good school. I got a computer science degree. Then I became a flight test engineer, did all these exciting things. And I still didn't get chosen, right? I applied twice, it didn't get chosen. That really ticked me off. And so then I decided to get out of the Air Force and go into the commercial field. But this was in 2004, right? The Ansari X Prize had just been won. So it was easy to extrapolate that we might see this rise in commercial space. And so I went to a very unusual place. I went to Google, right? As opposed to staying in the consulting field with the Defense Department or something like that. I just went to Google, hoping that we would see an uptick in commercial exploration. And we'll cover a little bit more of that later.
When I was 3 years old, my mom and dad used to take me everywhere. We went to parks, we went to museums, we went to anywhere you could ask a question and find out the answer. And one of the places they took me, since we lived near Houston, was Johnson Space Center. And I remember climbing on the rockets. I remember looking into mission control and being so excited and thinking that this would be the most amazing thing to do. I mean, I'm 3 years old. I have all the enthusiasm in the world. And then we get to the very last stop on well, I'm not even sure, it was a tour back then. And we walked into the visitor center. It was a room about this size. And it had all those big, bulky spacesuits that we saw. And from the very first one, and I thought, boy, that looks great. And those look big, though. But then along the side of the wall, they had a picture of every single astronaut that NASA had ever had. It was absolutely amazing. And I just stood there transfixed, my mom tells me, because it was a long time ago. And then I just stood there, and she said, well, you're ready to go, honey. And I said, Mom, why are there no women astronauts? And she said, I don't know, honey. But you know what to do when we don't know the answer. I said, yeah, we ask. So she had to help me write it, because I was 3. I couldn't write. I was 3. I wasn't that advanced. But she wrote a comment on the comment card, and we put it in that day, hoping that just maybe somebody would answer that question somewhere, or maybe it might make a difference. And so in 1977, I did that. And people were already training. I didn't know. But I was a kid, and I knew from that moment on that I would go to NASA, and I would be one of those women to be added to the wall. Didn't know if I wanted to be an astronaut or not, but I knew I wanted to come to NASA.
I have a somewhat similar story, although perhaps from a different perspective. My father actually consulted for NASA. He was a mathematician who solved the case of the 3-body problem that was necessary to allow the astronauts to be launched to go to the moon, Apollo astronauts. So I had sort of NASA in my blood as a small child, and because my father was also interested in Mars exploration, he used to have my elder brother and I pretend to be Phobos and Deimos, and he could be Mars. And he would watch us in our orbit so he could try to figure out the orbital mechanics. Rather odd childhood story. Yeah, I was always fear. I never got to be panic. Oh, well. So then, of course, in high school, I was interested and put in an experiment to the shuttle gas can program. In college, I was interested in space. And then I realized that studying biology and languages, both, I studied Russian and French, specifically because I figured those would be useful languages in working for NASA or doing space exploration. But in fact, I was also working on translation. And I would say probably my undergraduate degree in translation is one of the best things I ever did in terms of my current job or any space exploration job, because, as was mentioned earlier, the cultural differences, the language differences, just being able to listen to somebody, understand what they mean, not what they're saying, and then convey that to another person, what they mean, not what they're just saying. Because words between engineers and scientists, words between English and Russian, being able to translate the words in a way that effectively conveys the meaning is very important. So I went off to study plant biology. I studied muscle atrophy. Only as a postdoc did I realize, oh, gee, I'm studying muscles. Spaceflight astronaut, in spaceflight, astronauts lose their muscles. Maybe this is relevant. So I wrote an email to the name of somebody at the bottom of the Pathfinder website as the Pathfinder contact, the website contact. Completely serendipitous. I had no expectation that I would be able to follow my NASA dreams throughout most of my education. And just asking the one question, I then got an answer. Oh, we'd love to have you as another postdoc, which I didn't want. But sometime later after that, one of the people that I was put in contact with did let me know that there were jobs at NASA, and so that's how I got my job. So, asking questions and being persistent and understanding how to talk to people is very important.
Great. So now that you have heard and gotten to know a little bit of the panelists, I'll ask Linda to come up, and each will make a presentation of a couple minutes to talk about Women and Mars. You're welcome to the podium, or you can stay at your seat either.
I have to bend my neck a little less if I stand here. Great. We have some slides, and I'm going to run through these really fast because I want to tell you that I do not intend to be the Debbie Downer of this panel, but I'm speaking primarily to the youngest of the women in our audience, both on the web and physically present here, because we need you in leadership. And I want to thank Artemis for opening up our conference by saying the F word, feminism. I guess it's an issue of age. We're approximately the same age. I'm a little older than you. But I, too, at age 18, became an avowed feminist because that's when I first discovered what feminism was. And I said to myself, well, how can I not be a feminist? Someone dedicated to the cause of equal opportunity for men and women, equal opportunity for all people, regardless of sex or gender. And I still call myself a feminist, although I still encounter women in my aerospace community who feel like calling them their closet feminists. They say, well, I never call myself a feminist. It would be the kiss of death professionally. And I'm sad to think that that idea continues to stick with us. Next slide, please. Do I have a clicker? Oh, I do. All right. There we go. I just wanted to throw a bunch of numbers at you. I'm a qualitative researcher myself, but sometimes numbers give you a quicker snapshot of what's going on. I think we still have a lot of work to do. Thank goodness Colleen is in a leadership position, and as is Cassie in the Science Mission Directorate at NASA, and therefore in the Mars program writ large. Just for those of you who don't know, hey, there's Pascal. Jim Green, who's the director of the Planetary Science Division, is here in the audience, showing his support. Donna Shirley was a mission manager for Mars Pathfinder in 1997. She's a little bit of a hero to me, definitely a pioneer. Engineer. I think she came into the space program with Gemini. She has some interesting stories to tell. Kathy Weitz is in the audience. She was with the Mars Exploration Rover program. But you still see that women are not represented in equal numbers, both in the Mars Exploration program. If you look at the last item, according to the JPL zip code locator, in California, which is sort of the hotbed of the Mars Exploration program, with JPL and Ames, they list 24 women and 100 men. And here I'm looking more at leadership, at advisory groups, current PIs. The astrobiology program is probably a little better than some of the other research and analysis programs for some historical reasons, which we may have a chance to talk about in our panel discussion. The Space Studies Board, it's pretty much a guy's game, although they're trying. With the NASA Advisory Council, as far as I know, the NAC has never been chaired by a woman. And in terms of committee chairs, we're still lacking. I think Marion Blakey is chair of the Aeronautics Committee of the NAC. In the Planetary Science Decadal Survey, things start to look a little bit better, particularly on the Mars panel. National Academy of Sciences membership, well, this is, again, for historical reasons, it's still an uphill battle. I've pulled some excellent data from the Association for Women in Science, just to show, if you think of the National Academy of Sciences as sort of the bastion of scientific authority, as representative of the best of the American science community. This is a decent metric. And here's another chart from AWIS. I hope you can read it better than I can. And Chris, you're free to, this is all public data, so you can post it on your website or on the conference webpage, and I'm happy to share it with anybody who's interested. But this is all, I took it offline from AWIS, so you can do same. Percentage of women elected to the Academy, percentage of senior women PhDs in each field, scholarly award winners, and this is something that I was the founding and organizing chair of the Women in Aerospace Awards Committee. We started the awards program, this was when Marcia Smith was president, and she asked me to do this because she thought it was important for us to establish an awards program to bring recognition to women in the field. We don't toot our own horns enough. We have to do it. We have to help each other out, and this is still a cause of mine. And the MIT 2011 report, which was a 10-year update on the famous Charles Vest commissioned study on the status of women faculty in science and engineering at MIT. Bottom line, we've made progress, but we still have some cultural problems. So that's my quick review, and to the young women who are here or watching on the web, we need you, and think big and think high.
Next up, we'll hear from Tiffany Montage. Thanks. If you want, you're welcome to stay back.
Okay, everybody's cool if I just sit here, right? We're not super formal at Google. In fact, we ride around on unicycles and scooters, and we have a dinosaur, spaceship. If you want to come visit me, you are welcome to come by Google headquarters. Okay, I want to revise what I said earlier, though, because I just revealed something last week at another space conference I was speaking at, that while my initial goal to be an astronaut is sort of true from my earliest days, I also wanted to be, I told my father that I wanted to be a vigilante, like a vigilante killer. I think, sort of being an extroverted sociopath has its great benefits and possibly explains why I wasn't selected for astronaut training. And I call it sort of the exercising your not giving a shit-itude, because you simply cannot care what people think if you're going to be in a male-dominated field, right, like the military or engineering, which is where I currently reside. Do we happen to have the video, Chris? Oh, wonderful. Can we roll the video? There's a little clip of video I'd like to show you that just explains Google's interest in space. And by the way, you're looking at the Google Space Program. So right just prior to Ms. Coleman's mission, actually, we made this video in partnership with PBS NewsHour and Google Moderator and YouTube. It tells the story of our interest in space through our products.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
कि एक आदमी मानवता के लिए एक विशाल छलांग के लिए एक छोटा कदम है।
What'd you think? Good, right? Awesome. Yeah, I know. You're welcome. We all love space, right? Why? Because we all grew up on a diet of sci-fi and Apollo and Star Trek, and so then we end up in the internet business, and we are all impatient. Seems like space is an engineering problem just like anything else. And companies like Google are maybe one part arrogant, one part optimistic. And we simply look at space and say, well, this needs to be better, right? So then we apply our resources to attacking the problem. In our way of showing support, obviously we have a partnership with NASA, but our other way of showing support is through the Google Lunar X Prize.
Thanks so much, Tiffany. I can't help but resonate with the sci-fi comment and think that what Caddy really needed was for the Doctor Who fans out there, a sonic screwdriver.
Oh, yeah.
So next up is Susan Niebuhr.
Thanks, Colleen. Well, working for NASA was my lifelong dream. But when I left NASA, I discovered something interesting. I found a certain freedom that I didn't have at NASA because I could look at things that NASA by law wasn't looking at. The agency that I loved, where I had wanted to work since I was 3 years old, had one limitation that I worried about a lot, and I didn't see really on the top of agenda of the people down the hall. That concern was workforce. I worried a lot because I saw so many women my age, a little older, a little younger, postdocs, leaving the field before they had gotten a chance to fulfill their dreams. They left post-PhD when they were looking at other people's careers, or they left mid-postdoc, or post-postdoc, depending on how many they had, when the battle between life and work and 2 careers and a family became real. Since women planetary scientists are overwhelmingly married to male planetary scientists, it's a problem. And we know this by urban legend and by a study from 1992, but I've done another study this summer that's just been completed this fall, actually, that shows that it's still true. 70% of our women planetary scientists with PhDs are married to men in planetary science or another science and engineering career, while for men it's only 30%. So we have this mismatch, we have this problem, and when you get to the point that you've finished your PhD, you're well on your way, and then you get going, you go look for jobs. Well, if you're just one person, you can look anywhere you want. But if you're 2 people, and you both need to find, or you want to find, jobs in the same place, how dare you? It all of a sudden becomes a problem. We call that the 2-body problem. Yeah, it's true. Then comes kids, and it comes even harder. So say you've done it, and you've done your postdocs together, you were even lucky enough to get another postdoc together, and then all of a sudden you have kids, and you've got 2 full-time jobs that are big jobs, that are important jobs, that need dedication. But you also have this child coming out of you. And then this child that needs to be raised. And it becomes a problem. Anyway, well, add that to the research that I was doing at the time. I was looking at the history of the Discovery Program of small planetary missions. And I was going out and was interviewing. I interviewed over 100 people for that project. And there were project managers, and there were program scientists, and there were all the people in the field down to the systems engineers. And I was making these trips and doing these interviews and learning all these great, wonderful lessons, and people talked to me, and they were all men. And I found myself really struggling to make sure I wasn't doing some unconscious bias. It was just people I'd run into or something, people I was thinking of. And I went and did the statistics, and they're still all men. And bam. So here we have 2 sides of the same problem, that women were leaving the field for reasons that I felt had nothing to do with the quality of their science. And I've got some numbers, so I'm going to turn the page. So to understand the problem, I invited women at our annual conference, the Lunar Planetary Science Conference, to come and talk together. I had a small room down by the back of the pool. We set up for 7 a.m. in the morning, and I was tired of having these workforce conversations. I'm not getting any mentoring. I don't know where to find a job. Well, we always see the gray hair sitting in the front row. Well, are there any women here or not? I wanted to get that out of the bathrooms and into a real room. And we set it up for maybe 40. I thought that was audacious. We had over 100 people come that time, and it was hard to find that room, too. It was the basement and everything. And we sat and talked about what the problems were. And again, there were things that had nothing to do with science. And as a result of that meeting, we made one simple change. We lobbied and convinced, and actually all I had to do once we had a group was to go ask that the conference provide a room with a door, a lock, a fridge, and a comfortable chair. And that one difference, having a nursing room or a mother's room, made all the difference. Because once the postdoc age women knew that they would be able to come to the conference and still pump if they were nursing, or if they were bringing their baby, they'd have some place to nurse, or if there were instances where the mother would or the father would feed out of a bottle, absolutely. We made that one change, and the next year we had a significantly larger number of postdocs able to come to the conference. Easy change, nothing to do with science. More postdocs got to come. And why does that matter? You go to a conference to come to talk to people, to hear about the latest news, to make the collaborations that will then feed forward into the rest of your career. Because when these women couldn't come, they didn't make those connections. They may have tried just as hard as everybody else, but without having a beer at the bar with the guys, you're just not going to make it into the right collaborations. So we kept holding these meetings over the years, now so generously sponsored by PSD. I want to continue to thank them every chance I get because they've been very supportive of this. And we have these conversations, we learn what we need, and we start to make changes. You know, one of the things was that there were only a few people in our field on the science side that we really felt we could see it was always the same 5 people that would be on these committees and things that you studied. And we knew there had to be more. So we kicked off a project to see who's there at the top. And we did it by nomination. And part of this was to address that same thing about awards. You don't win the awards if you don't nominate. And you don't, and women don't nominate at the same rate as men either. So I set up a project where we had 51 women in planetary science. We were going to interview them and put their career path, their life story up on the web. And we did that. And I did it only by nomination. Not a problem. Easy. 1 a week. 51 women in planetary science. But then we wondered, well, is it just those 51? Because people kept coming and saying, well, hey, I want to nominate this one. I want to nominate this one. I said, this project cannot go on forever. Do I have my, yes. 350 PhD women working in planetary science. We did not know there were that many there. Okay, those are pretty pictures. What's the data? Well, there was a NASA-funded study last year that's just about to report results. I've run my own as well, and I just went through a couple numbers for you. The NASA-funded survey showed that 25% of respondents were women. My own data, where I did bottoms up and several different kinds of ways counting, I can tell you names of 91 women on the tenure track in planetary science. We don't see that many, but they're there. There's 91 on the tenure track, 350 total. But the problem is that we still have all these young women who don't know where they can find role models. And we confirmed a hunch with the surveys. 37% of the top departments in planetary science have no female faculty. Zero. And most of the rest only had 1 or 2. I think there's 1 with 4 and 2 with 3. So 37% of the top departments have no female faculty. Where are these women, these young women, seeing the role models and encountering them every day? I didn't have an easy solution for that, so we've been doing e-mentoring and trying to provide people who are looking for help answers and ways to meet each other. So now we have a blog and a listserv and a Twitter and all of that. We do e-mentoring. Somebody asked before this conference, well, how on earth could you even find out how many women you have? I counted them. There are 39 women in planetary science at NASA centers. 39. There are another 16 at government labs, and 3 more leading them as directors. And why does this matter? Well, it matters because of this. The pinnacle of a planetary science career is a lot like that of being an astronaut, getting to fly. You want to fly a mission to go learn something new because there's so much out there. NASA has flown 27 planetary science missions in the last 30 years, since 1979. 8 have been sent to Mars. Guess how many have been led by women? 1. Guess how many who have had deputy PIs? 1. Yeah, sorry, I get upset too. PS 1 and 1 flagship mission, not counting MSL, has had even a woman as instrument PI. And when I look at that, when the numbers are still 1, I wonder, where are the other women? And what amazing science explorations might they have proposed?
Thanks so much, Susan. And Cassie is last up.
That's a hard act to follow. It's very good questions.
Yeah. Excellent.
My background is in biology. And in biology, there are perhaps 30%. It's a much larger field. And so a lot of the issues that the women in planetary science have been facing are not, in my experience, but they were in biology in the past. And so I hope that people can learn who haven't yet figured out how to manage this issue of men, women, what do you do when you're trying to deal with these different priorities, by looking other places. Perhaps it's a translation issue again, or a meaning issue, but there are lessons that have been learned, and mentoring, I know that my mentors in biology where, as it coincidentally turns out, half women, half men. But it's really hard to find what you need if you can't figure out how to ask the questions. And so I think, again, getting back to my previous experience, asking the questions and looking outside the box can be helpful, but when you're looking at ones, it's really hard to do good science. I guess I will leave it there. I had some other remarks, but I think I'll wait till people are continuing to talk in the interests of time and getting everybody's opinion.
Great, thanks so much, Cassie. Let me ask one question from our online friends, and then folks in the audience who want to ask questions, feel free to come to the mic. This online question is, with current failures to get vehicles beyond low Earth orbit, and as we all know, Phobos, the Phobos mission, the Russian mission, is in low Earth orbit today, this morning, instead of heading toward Mars due to both 2 stages not firing. So Mars is a very difficult planet in all kinds of ways. So given those failures, do the panelists believe the push for human launches beyond Earth orbit should become a priority rather than risking it to automation? This is an online question.
Are we going in order, or is it me?
No, it doesn't. Yeah. Would you like to?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, so I am a firm proponent of commercial exploration, but I'm also a great apologist for NASA, just because I happen to think NASA has done a great job with their incredibly tiny budget, which is less than half of what Google currently has in cash per year.
Don't rub it in.
Anyway, so. Okay, look, you know, they're kind of, the thing about internet entrepreneurs, right? They're sort of serial entrepreneurs, very fast-moving. They're making incredible progress right now. So you have people like John Carmack from Armadillo Aerospace, and you have people like Jeff Bezos, right? Elon Musk. What did Elon say? He famously said, I'm going to put a man on Mars in 10 years, right? That's completely nuts, and it's also really awesome because you know that it's motivated by self-interest, right? So he fully anticipates that that man on Mars is going to be him, and I fully anticipate that the first man on Mars is going to be a woman, and I hope to God that that woman is me. But you know, either way, I think we need to encourage human exploration, robotic exploration. I mean, we need to create this vibrant ecosystem where everybody can thrive and flourish, and it's actually in NASA's best interest to do that, right? To take advantage of a market in which everybody does the thing that they're good at and sells it at a competitive price. They can make better use of their budget that way, right?
I want to recognize my colleague Kristen Erickson in the back of the room, who is constantly reminding all of us that we're past that human versus robotic. And yes, we are. I certainly agree with her. And yet, in the discourse about space exploration, this continues to come up. It gives the appearance that there are camps within the community. And I think it's impossible to address the entire spectrum of questions that we all want to explore in the process of exploring space by an either-or approach. Robotic missions have very different sets of goals and objectives than human missions do. And they're certainly complementary, and human missions learn from the products of robotic missions, and robotic missions learn from the products of human missions. And in my mind, well, I try not to be cynical, I'll just say my skeptical mind, I'm skeptical about near-term prospects for human missions to Mars because of the cost. I mean, we're struggling right now to deal with the costs of continuing robotic exploration of Mars because we've answered all the simple questions. We've done the simple missions. Now things get really complicated, which means they're more expensive.
Cassie?
So I am now going to get the opportunity to say what I would have said before. I am a very strong supporter of commercial space. I think it's great, and I think it really, as Linda said, is the way to spread the expenses out so that everybody can do this. In my job, and also because of my personal beliefs, I sort of become the conscience. I am the policeman. I'm the environmental protection person. If you want to go and explore space, do it right. We know how to screw up environments on the Earth. We know how to screw up ecosystems on the Earth. We sent rabbits to Australia. We've got kudzu in the southwest of this country. Aspens or cottonwoods in Russia, north of Russia. We know how to spread organisms around in such a way that they screw up what we want to do later. We want to search for life on Mars. We don't want to find us when we get there. So, and I have, when in talking with the other side of the X Prize side of the Google Lunar X Prize, sorry, no, this was actually, it was Will Pomeranz. And I was trying to encourage him to think about planetary protection and how you put together some of these commercial spaceflight missions. And it's really just good citizenship. Do your job, follow up with your responsibilities, don't litter. But trying to encourage all of the commercial actors who have consciences in the company. I mean, Google is a responsible company, but reminding people, making sure that everybody understands that, yeah, you can go out and spill everything and do the easy way and screw up the environment as you go along, the way that we explored this country, the way that humans have explored other countries, including Antarctica, unfortunately, although we're trying to clean up. The top of Mount Everest is a really good example of that. But we know how to do it wrong, and we know what the problem is when we do it wrong. So as we have the chance to do it right, let's take it.
This might be a nice opportunity because I'm not sure some people in the audience know, Cassie, what it means to be a planetary protection officer, or just give us a quick review of what steps are taken and what the purpose is in terms of safeguarding, forward contamination.
Thank you for asking. I'm a little self-centered, and sometimes I do forget that people don't know what this is. The purpose of planetary protection, it arises from the concept of protecting science. If you think about H.G. Wells and the War of the Worlds, we had Martians coming here, and in Wells's model, the Martians were killed off by the Earth organisms after having destroyed a lot of the humans. And so the idea behind planetary protection is to avoid both going to another place and leaving Earth organisms that might contaminate, and also avoid the possibility that we might bring something back to Earth that would be nasty. So we don't want War of the Worlds, we don't want the Andromeda strain. This is was discussed in the scientific community even before the development of the space age. It started out actually in the origins of life work in the Soviet Union and before the Soviet Union on that side of the planet, and then was adopted in the 40s and 50s and 60s in the US and in the Western world. It was instantiated in the Outer Space Treaty, which was signed in 1969, in one of the articles saying that signatories to the treaty, nations that is, must avoid harmful contamination of other locations and also avoid adverse effects to the environment of the Earth when bringing samples back. Why that adverse effects is in there is sort of a matter for debate. Maybe bringing back an asteroid full of gold would be a good thing. But the point is that there is an international community and an international consensus that this is important. But the only people who have been doing it so far have been the space agencies. So getting the commercial actors, getting the other activities that would be interested now as we have more and more players coming into the field, is something that is really an open area that needs a lot of work and a lot of effort to try and pay attention and make sure that something doesn't happen because one person throwing a match in a forest can cause a forest fire and destroy it for everybody. So it really is single individual actors that need to pay attention. Everybody needs to do it. Of course, you can keep throwing matches and not start a forest fire, but it only takes one to do real damage.
Thanks. One thing I'm wondering, actually, given what Susan has said about the representation of females in the general field, can each of you talk a little bit about who your role models were and so how you got into it? Given the male domination that we've heard of. Susan, you want to take that?
I never had a female professor. I never met anybody. The first time I ever met a woman physicist, she had come on one of those APS sponsored tours where you go to the to I guess the other side of the tracks, I guess, in the physics world where there are no women faculty, and she had come on an APS sponsored seminar to talk about black holes. And it was amazing to me, not just because of the topic. Black holes are awesome, yes. And, I was a little space fan, yes. But there she was, and she seemed like something out of another world to me. She had this long hair, and it was flowing all over the place. And she worked at MIT or Harvard or someplace very East Coasty, and in my mind. And her husband worked in California. And I couldn't figure out at the age of 18 how that worked exactly. And it was interesting that she happened to come, and I've talked to her later, and it cracks us up. But there I was, the first role model I had. As successful an astronomer as she was, she couldn't find a way to live in the same time zone as her husband. And they're both top-notch, really hot, sexy, amazing science. You'd think if anybody could solve that problem, they could. And I just didn't even know what to do with it.
Well, I can think of a couple of people. For personhood, my personal role model has always been my maternal grandmother. She was widowed before I was born, and so as I came to know her, she was an independent woman who had a job outside the home. I thought it was very glamorous. She was a housekeeper in our community hospital, but nobody else I knew had a grandmother who had a job. So I was very impressed. And she lived in a trailer, which I thought was very cool, all by herself. And I loved that idea. And so she continues, although she passed away a long time ago, she's still a role model to me for personhood. In my professional experiences, I was well along the way into my career in aerospace before I encountered women who I realized I had a lot to learn from. When I was working as a consultant in NASA with a big, what we call Beltway Bandit firm, consulting firm with big support contracts with NASA, BDM, the vice president in charge of our group was Adrian Timothy Pedersen, who was a solar physicist by training, flew an experiment on a Skylab mission, and had worked her way all the way up to the number 2 position in the Office of Space Science at NASA headquarters, and then left NASA to go into the private sector. Rumor had it that it was because she was given a clear message that she wouldn't be able to move up any higher. Adrian was not the kind of person who would ever talk about such things. She always kept her chin up and her head above the water. Very impressive. When I first went to work in her group, I was terrified of her. She's a very physically impressive person and intellectually even more impressive. But what I learned from her in working with her is that I was unique in the contributions I had to make in the workplace through my professional actions and to the space program, speaking very broadly, were unique, that no one else could do what I could do. And I had never really thought about myself that way before. And it was, over time, it just became a revelation, and I think about this often. And another person who became a friend and mentor to me, again, once I was well established in my career in aerospace, was Eileen Galloway, who we used to call the mother of space law and policy. She worked for the Library of Congress when the Senate decided, well, basically they were directed to draft the National Aeronautics and Space Act, and she was the resident expert on actually missile technology in the Library of Congress at that time, and was assigned to work with Senator Lyndon Johnson, one of my favorite presidents. And she had many very entertaining stories to tell about working with LBJ. Those of you who are under 40 in our audience probably don't know a whole lot about the colorful side of LBJ. But Eileen, of course, was retired by the time I met her, but she was still very active in the space law and policy community. And one lesson I learned from her was that it is critical to always be correct, to do your homework, get things straight, and make sure that if you're expressing an opinion, identify it as such. But if you have your facts lined up and you're correct, then you're good to go. And another thing I learned from her is to just, she was sort of, it was very interesting to me. She died at 103 just a couple of years ago. And so she was in her early 50s when the space program came to be. And so again, she was professionally very well established, very experienced. But she was really blind to gender, and yet at the same time, she understood that there were a lot of younger women in the field who needed encouragement and mentoring, and she always provided it. But she didn't talk about women's issues. She was just there for us, and she continues to be an inspiration to me today.
Goodness. Okay, so I.
Don't tell us Branscombe. No.
Yeah, well, actually, Richard Branson.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has fabulous hair.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, I know. I had a little photograph of Sally Ride on my nightstand for many years, and so that inspired me a little bit. But there are also very strong women in my family, not scientists, not engineers. My mother lived through the Cultural Revolution in China. I'm Chinese American. Luckily, I mean, this goes really back to being an extroverted sociopath. It's very convenient. Growing up in my family, I was always convinced that everything was possible to me, and yeah, some paths would be a little bit more challenging, just harder, because they tend to be male-dominated. And of course, bullishly, I pursued those paths, just to be contrary, I think. So I chose to do these things, be an engineer, join the military, and yeah, it was a pain in the butt doing boot camp and stuff like that. All irritated me. But when your eyes are on the goal, to be involved in space exploration, you just can't care about how hard it is. So I didn't care. And my advice is, you shouldn't feel bad if you are not identifying with trailblazing a path for future generations of women. I kind of don't care. And I know that sounds terrible to some people, right? But I don't have children. I don't know how long I have on this planet, probably another 50 years maybe. And look, if this open access to space doesn't happen within my lifetime, then you bet I'm going to change fields and devote myself to cryogenics.
I do want to segue on that as well, because I do think the not caring part, to go off on what Susan said, I have a PhD in physics. I never had a female. You better believe I never had a female professor. And so what I noticed was, even in undergraduate, even down to high school, there does seem to be, to me, anecdotally, a gender difference. A guy gets a C in physics and comes home and says, whoopee, I passed. A woman gets a C in physics and says, I failed, instead of just not caring. And so one thing physics really taught me is the not caring part. Is just, if you want to do something, you should just put your head down and do it, and better believe that the person next to you, whatever their gender, is actually doing the same thing. And that was my revelation in physics.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would also agree. The only class I ever got a C in was biochemistry, and you heard what Colleen said about me earlier. The fact is, I don't know that I would say not care, but it's irrelevant. Yeah. You just keep doing it. Be stubborn. Right. I mean, you got to be stubborn and have enough confidence that the path you want to go is a path that's going to happen regardless, because you're so stubborn it will. That's really how I dealt with it. I guess I was always kind of a stubborn little kid. I was an introverted sociopath, perhaps. But, so I never really had any individual person that I would call out as a mentor, but I was stubborn enough to do what I wanted to do because I wanted to do it, and it looked like the right thing to do. And until it was absolutely, without a possibility of a doubt, proven to me that I couldn't do it, I was going to keep trying.
I will ditto Cassie on stubbornness. And do we have some mother-daughter pairs in the audience? Yeah, oh, cool. That's wonderful. I'm so glad you're here. Wow. But I particularly want to say to the mothers that stubbornness can be a plus. It's not always a huge And I
It's a
used to
real
have,
plus.
in adulthood, I had, adult conversations with my mother and say, well, you see, Ma, I wouldn't have been where I was today if it weren't for my stubbornness. It's okay. I'm not in jail. I'm not on drugs. I'm not in trouble. I have a good job, and I got through college, and it was, my stubbornness really did me well. And she would kind of roll her eyeballs, but it can be channeled toward positive ends.
Right. So the positive word for stubbornness is perseverance.
Yes.
And that's the word that came up over and over when I was doing those interviews, both in the 51 women that we interviewed, in terms of how did you get to where you are today, was perseverance. And some of them had role models and some of them didn't. They kept naming the same names, I'll tell you that, which is interesting. But perseverance, and the same with all the men, too, when I would ask those career questions as well. That no matter what it puts in your way, as long as you can find a way around it, go for it.
So as the demographics change, eventually we can expect that what Susan found will be mitigated in that, as more women come up through the ranks, there will be more role models out there. The question of mentors is a question for immediate need, and so Susan and others, did you explore the idea of how can men be, for example, a male professor, how can a male professor be an effective mentor for a woman, even in her professional career, even if you don't serve as a good role model?
Oh, no, but I think men very much can serve as good role models. Absolutely. I mean, I didn't mean to say I didn't have any mentors, for example. I think men are the role models if there are no women available. They have to be. And it's interesting. I mean, you come from different fields, right? Physics is very harsh. And it just simply is. And you need to persevere and just put your head down. But I think very much, I can think of a number of male professors that were good role models who would, have us out to the house, things like that. But who would encourage us in the lab and take the time to actually look at our work. I can think of a lot who didn't as well. I think all the advice you hear in every field applies to planetary science, absolutely. But I do want to take quick exception, because what you said before, that this is going to change just by a matter of aging out. Okay, I thought that too, but then I did the numbers, and it's not true. There is something very interesting. Rachel Ives at the AIP has this thing she did called cohort analysis. And it's what you would imagine, it sounds like, right? You look at the number of women in, say, planetary science, or in physics, it's easier to quantify. Look at the number of women in physics at this decade, the 20 to 30, the 30 to 40, 40 to 50. See, what they're up to, and then compare your planetary scientists against those age brackets. I did that in a paper that I wrote a couple years ago when I was looking at who was leading our planetary science missions. Just a hunch I was running down. And when I found all those numbers, the one was heartbreaking. But then I said, well, maybe it's just that we haven't aged out. Maybe, maybe. But it's not true. I went and took the data from the AAS, the Division of Planetary Science of the American Astronomical Society. They gave me the data for their membership by age. And so all I had was the male-female breakdown by age. And so when I took the numbers where I saw women participating in all the various roles, including co-investigator and participating scientist, some of the more beginning roles, and I put that against what the typical male-female split was in planetary science, as quantified by the Division of Planetary Science, we're still low. We're still low by about a third. And so aging out is not happening. We are still losing a lot of women in the pipeline. We are losing them early at the postdoc stage, and we're losing it when you go to tenure track. They're not making it to tenure track or civil servant positions at the rates that you would expect, considering the male-female breakdown. And I'll be happy to share the paper with you later. It's in the literature in space policy.
And I think that's where some of these small changes come in. Certainly in biology, two of the graduate students in my graduate lab had babies, and they would sit on top of their desks as they were doing lab experiments. Admittedly, they weren't brought into the radiation lab. But the relatively minor accommodations that can be made, I think, are, as Susan demonstrated at the LPSC, I think are one of the aspects that can help that. But the other one that Susan also mentioned is just be encouraging. No, it's not actually that different to mentor a woman than a man, as long as you take into account a few, there may be some quirks of biology that, if a woman's having a baby, she's going to have some issues that a man won't have to face. But it's not that different. It's just be encouraging, be enthusiastic, sort of try to provide opportunities. There's actually a really interesting video film, it was at the time, a training film for workers in World War II, managers in World War II, who were actually supposed to have, Rosie the Riveter coming into their machine shop, and they were this video is trying to explain how to work with the women in such a way that they can actually perform the duties that they were needed to perform. And it's surprisingly sophisticated in the way it presents itself, because it's a woman and her supervisor and another supervisor, and the video shows what supervisor who is really not comfortable working with women going home, and his wife is always sort of laughing at him behind his back because he's such a clueless guy. In the 40s, this was made, but it just goes through this process of women don't necessarily have the background, but you have to explain clearly and don't assume they know stuff, and so it's actually a useful video, I think, for anybody who's going to have students coming in who aren't already experienced in the field to watch. And the fact that it was in the 40s and was that clever and making this sort of backwards commentary about clueless men was pretty entertaining.
So I have some physics professors who I'd like to show that to.
Oh yeah, me too. I started out as physics at MIT, and I switched over to biology because I decided it was more complicated and therefore more interesting.
I do want to say, given I'm definitely not in Susan's generation, being much older, that I have seen a change, that I had physics professors who really, it just boggled my mind, made me crazy, didn't think that I should be there because I was female. And I can't be sure, but I doubt that same attitude is at least publicly displayed today. And I really do think that part has at least changed. Are we, does that mean we're anywhere near done? Well, I think Susan's statistics shows we're not done, but has there been a change that I've seen in my life? I believe so. A change for the better. It's just so much more to go than that.
Sorry. I just want to follow up just a little bit with that. Maybe you're speaking about how to be a mentor for women. And what I'd like to speak to, as well as for the whole timing out or aging out of maybe women coming up through the field, is maybe it's also interesting to think about just talking to the men about maybe it's going to be the men moving, the sexist men or the sexism that we see as young students. As an engineering student in undergrad, I had a male professor who would make comments and say things like, well, as a woman, you don't have the 3D visuality ability that the guys do, and so you're going to have more trouble with this, and things like that. And so hopefully, maybe what's going to happen is that the aging out of those types of male role models or people that we come into contact with, maybe hopefully also that will be moving away, and we will get more men, at least, and as women as well, but to people that are just not so focused on whether you're a man or a woman, and that you're an engineer or you're a scientist, and that you have, general abilities. And so hopefully maybe that'll be what's going to age out rather than...
I think that's actually even more important than being a mentor, is just demonstrate that unacceptable behavior is unacceptable when you see it. Call people on it as your colleagues or your superiors if you can, but your, people beneath you in the hierarchy, but certainly your peers, call them on it.
Let me mention one thing that I don't think it's come up, but boy, I think it's so important, and I think this very panel shows it. When women support other women, wherever you are in the hierarchy, that has made a huge change in my career. I mean, I can see a lot of colleagues, even in the audience. Marguerite Broadwell is here from NASA. The fact that we can get together in our positions and actually support each other, to me, that is just enormous. There's enough women that we can do that. And when I started my career 31 years ago at NASA, that was not true. So I just think it's wonderful, and this conference itself shows the change there.
Yeah, and I wanted to thank you for your comments. The last commenter, I haven't had to do this for a long time, which is a sign of progress, but in the 80s and 90s, working with many male managers in many different places in NASA, on the human spaceflight side and on the science side. We would have discussions about encouraging women to participate and advancing women in these particular arenas. And whenever I would get pushback, I would say, do you have daughters? Mm-hmm. Or do you have sisters? Or you have a mother? For sure you have a mother. And it seemed to help in a lot of cases to just get them to think about this in a personal way. In other words, they're a guy, so they can't put themselves in our shoes, but they can think about experiences that their mother might have had, or their sisters, or their daughters, or particularly with daughters. I think this resonates a lot with men when they think about, what if my daughter faces barriers that have to do with nothing except her sex and gender? Then it becomes real to them.
Hi, I've got two questions. One is, well, asked about my second question is about Google specifically, so I'll ask about that later. The first one is, given that recently we've heard about the news about budget cuts, pulling the budget out of the Planetary Science Division to, kind of overfund for the James Webb Telescope, how does that affect the planetary community, especially for women, since there's already less women percentage in that community?
So remember that until we have another continuing resolution, actually, we don't have a budget at NASA for 2012. So there is no re-jittering of the budget that I can actually talk about, because frankly, we're on continuing resolution. So it's been very strange in terms of how the agency across NASA has been able to run. Because we have all kinds of missions we're developing. The James Webb Space Telescope is only one of them. The Mars Science Lab clearly is one, hopefully, that in 8.5 months, 9 months, will be on Mars, but then operating. But unfortunately, we just can't talk about how the mix will fall out because we don't know. That's up to Congress. So. That's the system, and normally, even for 2013, we hear about what our position will be before, obviously, the February rollout to the public. We'll see even whether that happens this year. It's a strange year.
I think it is undeniable that uncertainty and periods of budgetary caution are challenging for everybody in a community, and even the minority members as much or more so than the majority.
Right. So when you hear, X, Y, and Z has happened, it only happens once the Congress disposes. And the president isn't proposing this, and we don't know what the Congress will decide.
You raise an interesting point, though, and I'm speaking as someone not inside NASA. In that the U.S. government writ large, this is through many efforts from the Education Department, the National Science Foundation, and other research agencies, have done a really good job of raising the numbers of female PhDs graduating in the STEM disciplines. But the challenge comes when budgets in the research agencies are not growing. We're producing these PhDs, and we're getting them all excited about participating in these programs, such as planetary exploration. But can we deliver them jobs? And that's a difficulty that's not just a challenge for NASA. It's a challenge for academia. It's a challenge for industry. It's a challenge across the board. So it's a good point that you raised.
My second question is not necessarily about women, but Mars and Google. So I work with some planetary data from the PDS node, the Planetary Data System. And I find that website is really hard to go through to look for the specific type of data you want. And when I see things like Google Mars, it's easy to access, it's fun, it speaks to even the general audience, not just scientists. I was wondering if Google could integrate that with the PDS system or something.
Yeah, we are. We actually are working with your folks on PDS indexing.
Oh, wow.
You're welcome.
That actually does relate to the previous comment about budgets.
But let me just make a comment about the mentoring thing. I didn't have a female mentor. You know who my mentor was? His name is Pete Worden. He is the head of NASA Ames. And he is a crotchety old man, and that is great because so am I. I was born a crotchety old man. And so, of course, it made sense for us to collaborate, and he has been a lifelong mentor. He's actually my oldest friend. I've known him since before I was in the Air Force, since I was a cadet. So, you just have to be like that, treat women as you would treat anybody else. I mean, I can't stress this enough, I haven't really identified with a lot of female qualities. I'm sociopath. So I don't. Can I sit over here?
I said I was. Is everybody moving away?
I mean, I don't identify with. Here's the thing. My parents, they did something very obnoxiously, strange. When I was a very small child, they had my IQ tested, and after that, I used to be a card-carrying member of Mensa, right? Like, how nerdy is that? I had to carry my card around, and I say used to only because I haven't paid my dues in quite a while, so don't tell them. So that was. If I ever ran into any trouble or any opposition from men, look, here's my card. So go F yourself, right?
Kathy? So I was surprised, Susan, when you made your comment about the nursing room, that this was the solution, and that to me that's a solution that works for a little while, a few months, a few years, when you're nursing. But to me, daycare runs my life, and it's the one thing that is never constant. You find the best person in the whole world, and she moves somewhere, or those kinds of things. And being sometimes a boss within the astronaut office, one of the things I try to do is be as family friendly as I can within, all the things of, working from home, telecommuting, understanding when somebody says their kid is sick, all those kinds of things. But I just wondered, I was curious not to hear daycare brought up, because to me, having daycare on site that is close, where you're not driving 20 minutes of stressful, I should have left the office earlier. I mean, that time between leaving work and getting my kid is always the worst time for me. And when at the Johnson Space Center, it's right down the block. They had a 3-year waiting list. Okay, I said, I can't believe you didn't sign up when you were pregnant. I mean, so they have that daycare on site, and at the same time, it opens at 7. Mission control shift, first shift starts at 7. I mean, so it's still not there, but having that kind of on-site or just very proactive, how can we take care of families, not just for women, but I would think it addresses some of this postdoc problem that we're talking about here. So I wonder what your opinion was on there.
Well, it absolutely does address some of that problem, and it is very much. One of the things I was thinking a minute ago that I wish I had emphasized: these are not solutions for women. These are life-friendly solutions for everybody. And the postdoc generation now, and certainly the graduate students as well, it's much more of a generational issue. The men want to help. The men want to see their kids. They need these family-friendly flexibility policies as well. And again, something I can say now that I'm not at NASA. A lot of people in our group actually wanted to have daycare on site at the conference, and some groups do that. We had tried to work that individually a number of times with the conference leaders, and they're the Houston ones, and LPI, I guess, would not take on the liability for having on-site conference care. So what we did was we took one step, and then we were open to starting it up again, and on-site daycare for the conference did not end up being as huge of a priority. People did not want to work. I mean, it was enough to say, yeah, it would be nice and helpful, but not enough that people wanted to actually do a lot of work on it. So for us, it didn't happen. A lot of fields it has happened, and a lot of fields, when I talk to my colleagues in the humanities, now I do all the social media stuff, they're appalled that we don't have on-site daycare at conferences, because that is a given, because that is a field that has had more women, and they have felt empowered enough to speak up. But in our field, where women are very much the minority, 15% or so, depending on the age rank, it has not been something that we even felt that we could start to address, which kind of shows you where the field is. But I will say that those companies and institutions and universities and agencies that have been able to take family-friendly steps, like encouraging telecommuting, get more productivity out of both members of that couple, and more longevity and things like that. Family-friendly, absolutely important for both men and women of this generation, absolutely.
Lisa, thanks.
So I'm going to sort of throw a challenge out to some of the members of the panel. I looked at your data, Linda, and I've had many conversations with Susan about women in planetary engineering. There's a lot of data that Susan has collected, and one person can do only so much about women in planetary science. But my own personal, informal, anecdotal experience in meetings is generally the percentage of women engineers is far lower than the percentage of women scientists in a room, if you're in a big mission team meeting or something like that. And I actually noted, because I'm sitting here with somebody who was an engineer on Phoenix, that you didn't even notice in your research, Linda, that there were women on Phoenix engineering team. So I would challenge somebody up there to do the numbers, to see what the trends are, and maybe start looking at the barriers for engineers as well. I mean, this is Women and Mars, and as was pointed out at the very beginning of this session, there's a broad range of skills, capabilities, and careers. And so I don't know if that's maybe something Google could take on, or Linda, or Susan's already still completely covering the waterfront on the science side, but...
I'd be happy to. It's just a matter of who, yeah.
Right. So just thought I'd throw that out there. And maybe, Tiffany, if you had any other comments, being the lone engineer up there.
Right. So even at Google, and we have every amenity. We have daycare. We have scooters, unicycles, dinosaurs. What else could a woman want? We have every amenity, and even at Google, it's 15% in engineering. But on the other hand, that sort of doesn't bother me, because I see this trend. I mean, look, space access is opening up for everyone, and our focus here on this panel, and I think for you folks in the audience, has been sort of academia and NASA and higher education and science, but engineering and planetary exploration will inherently involve many other disciplines and things beyond just having a higher education, right? I mean, you need to be a MacGyver and a problem solver and have critical thinking and be an entrepreneur, right? This entire commercial space ecosystem will open up, and again, it better happen within my lifetime, or else. And I already feel gypped, by the way. I already feel like they promised me the future would involve a lot of jetpacks and hover cars, and that we'd all be able to vacation on the moon and Mars. So, the sense of impatience and urgency, a lot of people throughout the commercial field feel this, right? And as you see the rising number of internet entrepreneurs, people who have made their money, made their mark, and now have the time and resource to devote to these huge problems, you will see it start to open up for everybody. So don't worry if you are not going to pursue science. Be a kick-ass entrepreneur, right? Or be a great engineer, or just be, handy.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to just choose the path of science, although I agree it helps. But that was a crapshoot for me. How do you choose medicine? Do you choose geology? Looking at the Apollo days, there was one geologist. It was out of 12 moonwalkers.
Jack Schmidt, last one.
Great.
Last one.
So, okay. So how do you know what to choose? Well, okay, I'm going to choose computer science because that's what I think is cool. But my advice is, engineering is where it's at. You need to be able to solve problems.
So we have two more questions coming up. Let's see if we can't have the last two questioners.
I see an increase in people being supportive of telework, and there's more webcasting and ability to work from home and balance the family. And what I would hope would happen is that more people who don't necessarily need to telework would just practice it anyway, in the workplace. I notice that a lot. It would be nice if people, even at upper levels, would just practice teleworking so that when other people telework, it just becomes more of a norm. Sometimes on emails, I see a nice note, whether they think it's needed or not. Here's the conference number for anyone calling in. To me, that's a welcoming practice, because if I have to say, hey, I'm the oddball who can't be there, then it's not making the practice as welcoming. And also what I've noticed in just career in general and in my education, I did put my PhD on hold because I couldn't do all the balancing. But it's hard to travel, so you have to, if you're
Travel's terrible.
very family-minded or you're single mom like I am, you can't always travel. And I remember one instance where it's back to school night. I was just not going to miss it. I needed to travel, but I knew both the kids would be making me something. Carolyn won't want to hear this story. But and then I got to back to school night, and sure enough, her little creation that she made said, "Hi, Mommy." So I was, so glad that I didn't take the trip. So, but I have had a lot of things in that doctoral program and just in my career where if you couldn't travel, you kind of have to sideline for a while until you can get to that point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I would want to pose one thing to the panel. We are talking childcare. We are talking, balancing. Personally, I did it differently, and as that, I became a role model, although I didn't really intend to be that way. I took my baby to the workplace. If my baby would be young today, I mean, mine are 17 and 21 nowadays, they would be here with me. And yes, they might be a bit more noisy than the rest of the audience. My apologies for that. But it has an added bonus. It's not just that it made it possible for me to travel and to do all the things that I thought important, but it also had two added bonuses. One, it showed the world that children are still part of our world, because what we've been doing is we've been organizing our society in such a way that we kind of put them in an extra box and then close the lid until you go home. Then you pick them up, and now you're suddenly part of, the family and the society with families again. And the other bonus is, and that's a really important one, we show children what we really do. Because most of our kids have no clue what their parents do. They might know your job title, but what you do in a day-to-day business, they have no idea. And that actually is, I think, a bad thing for society, because it seems to be a society without children, and for the children, because they have no idea what society is all about. So, but to do this, and I said I became a role model, at that time I was boss of an organization. So, I simply did it, and whether someone liked it, of course, was, less of a problem. I did try to not annoy my secretaries with it, because that wasn't the point. But in that, I heard a lot of other bosses of big multinationals even saying, hey, my secretary is pregnant. Could she do this? Could she take the child? And one of the reasons I took them, I breastfed them for years. Then the easiest thing is to have them with you.
No, absolutely.
And it's much easier than any other solution. So there are other ways, and that's another thing I want to say. If you don't have a mentor, what you could do, and what I have done 30 years ago, find a group of young women like you, and they could be in any field. There could be one an engineer, and one a lawyer, and one a doctor, and support each other. And together you grow in your careers. I've done that. And now I'm proud to say that one of us is a very important Dutch politician. One of us is in charge of one of the biggest railway projects we have in the Netherlands. Because apparently, supporting each other, we we had the opportunity to grow. And even without male mentors, you might make it that way.
Thank you.
Can I
Go
respond
ahead.
to that?
Sure.
I just want to say that I think had we been in other circumstances, we would have been very good friends, because I was a little floored by the daycare question. Personally, I can answer it professionally. It's very important. We must have it. It's wonderful. But for me, that wasn't the way I went either. I held my babies. I took my babies to the conferences. We went to LPSC. Before we started doing all this work, before I started doing all this work, I took my baby with me. He was on my hip, and I went to poster sessions with him, and I talked to people with him, and I could do that. But I was in a privileged position, you see, because I was at NASA headquarters. And so I could do it, and nobody could tell me no. Well, Colleen could have, but she didn't.
Why would I?
But it was interesting because just by having him there with me, I had my sling, and so it didn't bother anybody. We just did it. Although he did learn to shake hands, which was a little unnerving at 6 months old. But other than that, there were no problems. And so many people came up to me, men and women. It was usually the younger women who said, if I'd known we could do that, I would have come last year when my babies were small. I wouldn't have missed out on those opportunities. And other younger women, graduate students, said, I can do that? I said, I don't know. Nobody told me not to. You know, I just sit in the back row, and, you know, when we need to feed, we go out. But he sleeps all the day. You know, he's 6 months old. He sleeps all the time. It was fine. It was fine. I carried my babies. My husband carried my babies, because they're not just mine. They're ours. And so now when you go to this particular conference, you know what you see. You see women with babies and you see men with babies. And the women in the humanities have been doing this for decades. This is the way they do it. And all it took was somebody standing up and doing it. And I think it was okay. I thought that we used to call them graybeards, would be very upset.
Which I always object to. Should be gray hair.
I know, exactly. And that's why I smiled. Just teasing. But I thought it would be the old men that would be very upset, frankly.
It was the old women, I found.
Well, it was not the old men, I can tell you that.
No, I'm serious.
Yeah, the older men came up to me, and every time they smiled, they wanted to talk to him, remind him of his grandchildren. Oh, my daughter does this, my daughter does that. And it's fascinating, because these are old, crusty men I'd heard bad stories from. But once you put them in thinking about another scientist as their daughter, you humanize it. And then they're thinking, oh, this is a person who might want to also get to daycare before it closes, or whatever it might have to do. And then you stop having these 7 o'clock meetings in the evenings and things like that. So a lot of it really is humanizing the workplace. And if you can do that while at the same time you're pushing to get and go so far and so fast to achieve these amazing things, these audacious things like going to Mars, I think that's fantastic. But it's not easy. And I want to applaud anybody who works for this, because as we move forward to do this, that we can have men and women, and men and women with children. That would be nice.
So I think that wraps. Do you have something
I don't
to add?
know.
I think
Yeah,
Tiffany looks like she'd like
I was
to add.
cringing a little bit only because I am kind of grossed out by babies and by children. I just, well, you know, I mean, I don't particularly like children or.
Tiffany, I like children, but I actually think until they're 2, they're not that interesting.
Yeah, well, you know, and I don't think that I ever was one of those. I think I was just shorter, just a lot shorter.
We're not all the same, though.
Yeah,
you
well,
can't say
so-
a woman does this. We're not all the same, and that's fine.
Yeah, sure. I have a cat. I have a fantastic cat, a Siamese cat, Dr. No, and I would advocate for my right to bring her everywhere. In fact, I do. I bring her to Google. And when I go to Mars, I'll be bringing her too, in a tiny suit.
Well, you know, the only reason I say that it was okay to bring babies is because when we found that you didn't bring babies, you lost women at the conference and it was like 3 years, right? Or you have 2 kids, that's 4 years, that you can't leave your baby very well. Everybody does it fine, but it's very difficult. And we found in real life, people were just not coming to the conferences. And when you don't come to the conferences and you don't do the networking and you don't do all of that, you lose some opportunities later on.
So on that from Susan, I think we should thank the entire panel for a very interesting session. And as a special surprise, I'd like to announce that Jim Green from NASA will be here to present an award to someone who has worked at NASA and is very near and dear to us all.
Thank you very much, Colleen. You know, NASA's Planetary Science Division, on very special occasions, really recognizes key individuals for their outstanding role model, their ability to work with the community in many different ways. It's not just all about science, it's a lot of the other aspects that we want to recognize. So we have our highest honor. It's where we give back to the community, and that is our Public Service Award. And I'm here today to recognize Dr. Susan Niebuhr. Susan, your exemplary leadership abilities have helped many women in the field, both planetary and astrophysics, and by helping them figure out ways to cope with the specific issues and concerns when blending family and career, you richly deserve this award. And it's really important for us and for you to know that you have made a difference. So Susan, let me give you the Planetary Science Division's Public Service Award. There's a fabulous quote on this. It's from Ruth Benedict, and I'd like to read it. I long to speak out the intense inspiration that comes to me from the lives of strong women. They have made of their lives a great adventure. Susan, you are the strongest woman I know. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Chris?
All right, thank you, Colleen, and well done, Susan. Thank you very much. That was a great panel, very, very interesting, and I think some wonderful topics brought up. So just before, we're going to have an hour and a half, I don't even know what time it is right now. It's probably about an hour and 20-minute lunch. We're going to start up again at 1 o'clock, but for those of you who ordered lunch, I lied earlier. Lunch will not be upstairs, it'll be downstairs, so you can pick up your lunch downstairs. We have a very limited number of lunches at $10, so if you get down there after we hand out the ones that have already been purchased, you might be able to get one. Otherwise, if you're not familiar with the area, there are restaurants in the area. There's a Bertucci's around the corner. There's Tonics, which is right down the street, and several other restaurants. So you should have time to go to a restaurant as well if you aren't able to get a boxed lunch. But I hope you'll come back at 1 o'clock. We have the STEM panel, which is going to be spectacular. Then we have the Getting to Mars panel. So if you want to find out how we're actually going to get there, you know, that'll be a great panel. And then we have the always inspiring Penny Boston finishing off the day. So I'll see you back here at 1. Thank you.